Chapter 968. If it had not been for the fact that Xia had told Wu Qi about her origin and sworn a life-or-death pact with Wu Qi according to the law of the invisible heavenly devil in the outer realms, and that she had an indescribable feeling for Wu Qi, how could Wu Qi dare to take Xia with him? It would be strange if he did not use all kinds of means to suppress her. In the first 2 days, Wu Qi was really afraid that when he woke up one morning, all the humans in the East Sea would be devoured by Xia. Xia's eyes flickered with a strange light. Without saying a word, Kitagarbha led many bodhisattvas and arhats to form the formation of the 6 paths of the underworld, then charged toward the army of the Ling dynasty while emitting a great sheet of Buddhist light. The small wheel of the 6 paths of reincarnation spun in the void, and the souls of 30% of the soldiers of the Ling dynasty immediately drifted away and were forcibly sucked into it. Sharp claws tore the bodies of the soldiers of the Ling dynasty, and sharp teeth chewed their internal organs, bones, and flesh crazily. Billowing ghost aura frantically devoured the soul aura of these soldiers of the Ling dynasty. Wherever the army of heavenly ghosts passed, not even a blade of grass grew. The army of the Ling dynasty resisted for less than a quarter of an hour before it was wiped out by these heavenly ghosts, who launched a 3-dimensional attack from all directions, from the sky and from the ground. Wu Qi took a step forward and stood on the edge of the cliff. The sun shone on Wu Qi, gilding Wu Qi's black robe. The army of heavenly ghosts knelt on the ground like Chi-Chi and kowtowed to Wu Qi. The sound of their kowtows rumbled like thunder, shaking the earth. Because of Wu Qi's thunderous means, the battle line in the East Sea had quickly advanced tens of thousands of miles to the east, and Jindong City, which had fallen, was back in the hands of the East Sea. After killing all the soldiers of the Ling dynasty, the heavenly ghosts raised their claws and shouted, "His Majesty, live forever." As if he thought he could win the battle easily, the general of the Ling dynasty, with a few guards, watched the battle less than 3 miles away from the city wall, laughing and discussing the situation with his confidants. In the camp behind him, the million-strong army of Ling dynasty was leisurely enjoying themselves. Shrill howls could be heard coming from some of the tents. It was the sound of great Yu's women, who had been abducted along the way, being raped by Ling dynasty soldiers. Nonsense! Wu Qi sneered. I swear to heaven that no one above the realm of primordial has joined the battle in the East Sea this time. He reached out and drew a line in the air. A rift tens of thousands of miles long appeared over the army of the Ling dynasty. Endless water from the yellow spring poured down, accompanied by the miserable howls of countless ghosts. The water fell on the soldiers of the Ling dynasty and burned them until white smoke rose from their bodies. Before long, a large number of soldiers of the Ling dynasty were burned to pieces and finally melted into filthy water. The hundreds of soldiers of the East Sea, riddled with wounds, stared blankly at the army of heavenly ghosts. When they saw that the army only ravaged the camp of the Ling dynasty but did not invade the city they were stationed in, they could not help but raise their weapons and roar at the same time. With the help of the demon Yuan Ling crystal, which was purified from the bodies of the Ling dynasty soldiers, Wu Qi had slaughtered all the way north. Xia's cultivation base had been restored to the peak of the 4th tier of Tao-breaking realm. When it came to rapid cultivation base growth, no creature in the chaotic world could be faster than the invisible heavenly devil when there were enough sacrifices. The city, which measured 3 miles in circumference, together with the nearby villages and towns, had no more than 100,000 people. It was the territory of Diyu province, the most desolate of the neighboring provinces. The population of such a 9th-grade province was no more than 10 million, and the garrison in this city was only about 100 soldiers. A shrill, unpleasant, wild howl rose into the sky, and then a heavenly ghost, whose body was entirely red, rushed out of the chaotic light while shouting the slogan, "My emperor may live forever." The heavenly ghost, who stood 1,000 feet tall and had countless sharp bone spikes growing all over his body, was clad in an excellent armor forged for him by Wu Qi himself, and had a pair of crescent scimitars hanging on his wrists as he charged forward like a madman. Wu Qi knew that it was coming. The East Sea had suddenly and easily wiped out hundreds of the Ling dynasty's armies, causing the Ling dynasty to lose countless soldiers, and even killing every last one of them without leaving a single soldier to report back. Therefore, Zhang Tingyun thought that it was an almighty expert of the East Sea like Wu Qi who had personally come. Only an almighty expert of the realm of Primordial could easily wipe out so many of the Ling dynasty's armies. In a nameless city at the border of the East Sea, Wu Qi stood on the edge of a hill outside the city, with Princess Zhonglu on his left, narrowing her eyes and sneering. The little she-fiend Xia stood on his right, her arms wrapped around Wu Qi's, twisting her body like a caterpillar and humming a song indifferently as she watched the bloody scene on the city wall with a smile on her face. Raising his hand, Wu Qi released a hazy chaotic light from his palm. Behind him were tens of millions of heavenly ghosts, each shrouded in a towering murderous aura. They surged across the land like a tide and quickly filled the empty space around the city. In an instant, the million-strong army of the Ling dynasty was enveloped by 10 times the number of heavenly ghosts. Laughing strangely, these ferocious heavenly ghosts launched a storm-like attack on the Ling dynasty's army. War, no matter what name was used to start a war, behind the glorious signboard, it was always dark and bloody, filled with the blood and shame of countless innocent people. Wherever the army of the Ling dynasty passed, or the cities of the Ling dynasty captured by the army of the East Sea, all the crimes were the same. This was something that even Wu Qi could not control. Therefore, Zhang Tingyun came to reason with Wu Qi. According to the agreement between him and Wu Qi, once a primordial expert of the East Sea joined the battle, the East Sea would lose the battle. According to the agreement, the entire territory of the East Sea and Princess Zhonglu would be Zhang Tingyun's spoils of war. Kitagarbha was even more ferocious. Surrounded by a tumbling Buddhist power, he grabbed a general standing next to Zhang Tingyun, whose cultivation base had reached the level of Hongmeng Panga heaven, and tore his head off. As soon as he saw Wu Qi, Zhang Tingyun snapped from 100 miles away, "King of East Sea, how shameless you are!" Battle cries shook the sky. Led by Kitagarbha, Bodhisattvas and Arhats, Kitagarbha had regained his Dharmakaya of the netherworld, which was shrouded in dark karma. Like evil ghosts, they slaughtered the army of the Ling dynasty, leaving corpses and rivers of blood everywhere. Nether Yaksha followed closely behind, dealing the most terrifying blow to the army of the Ling dynasty. Wu Qi snorted coldly. Just as he was about to unleash the army of heavenly ghosts in his body to fight the Ling dynasty, Xia suddenly smiled charmingly. She clapped her hands and said, "Your Highness, this man is so rude. Let me teach him a good lesson." For heavenly ghosts who could travel through the void at will, no defensive mechanism or formation was a problem. They turned the camp of the army of the Ling dynasty into a sieve, and the army of 1,000,000 soldiers turned into ghosts in an instant. With a wave of his hand, a stream of chaotic energy swept across the battlefield, and all the soldiers disappeared into it. Wu Qi glanced at the small city that had survived the disaster, then turned into a beam of green light and flew south. Princess Zhonglu and Xia followed closely behind Wu Qi. Xia had a fist-sized blood-colored pearl in her hand, which she held up to Princess Zhonglu. Princess Zhonglu shook her head with a smile, and Xia hurriedly swallowed the pearl. As such a small city, it naturally did not have any powerful defensive mechanisms or anything like that. The garrison of 100 soldiers was 10% of the entire army in the province. Standing sparsely on the city wall, they were howling and fighting the 9,000 soldiers of Ling dynasty who were besieging the city. 7 days ago, Wu Qi personally came to the front line to supervise the battle. For 7 days and 7 nights, he had crossed almost the entire East Sea defense line from south to north, destroying nearly 100 legions of the Ling dynasty with millions of soldiers, over 1,000 legions with hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and countless legions with tens of thousands of soldiers. The nameless city in front of him was the northernmost, most remote, and weakest city in the East Sea defense line. All the armies of the Ling dynasty south of the city had stopped advancing westward and were retreating in panic. Amidst the thunderous cheers of the heavenly ghosts, the general of the Ling dynasty, whose cultivation base had reached the peak of the second Panga heaven, was distracted for a moment. Then, the general, who had the same cultivation base as him but was not afraid of death, cut off his head at the cost of one of his arms and one of his thighs. The head of the general of the Ling dynasty flew up into the sky with a blank look on his face, then fell heavily to the ground and was eaten up by the few soldiers of the heavenly ghosts. An enormous power of faith poured into Wu Qi's body and was gradually absorbed by the enormous emperor aura in Wu Qi's body. Originally, the emperor aura Wu Qi obtained when he established a neutral kingdom of Yan Huang in the boundless world inside him was pure purple. But a few days ago, he suddenly had an idea. He named the yellow spring in the heavenly ghoul clan, which was multiplying and nourishing in his body. As a result, his purple emperor aura suddenly turned purple-red, mixed with a strong smell of blood. The originally dignified and solemn emperor aura turned purple-red, overbearing, dignified, evil, and gloomy. Even Wu Qi could not extract the demon Yuan Ling crystals from the soldiers he had slaughtered without any psychological burden like Yi Xia. Only the invisible heavenly devil could do it at will without any psychological burden and act on instinct. Zhang Tingyun snapped, "That's absurd. If that's the case, are the armies of the Ling dynasty nothing? Did you wipe out all the armies in the front line in just 7 days? If you have such a powerful army in the East Sea, why were you beaten back 20,000 miles by the Ling dynasty a few days ago and lost your city and land?" As the terrible water of the yellow spring rolled down, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha and the other bodhisattvas and arhats of the netherworld branch of the Buddhist League drifted out. The purest energy essence of millions of soldiers of the Ling dynasty condensed into a mass of energy essence the size of a human head. After being purified by Yi Xia with the colorful fiend flame, it turned into the purest demon Yuan Ling crystal without any impurities. After swallowing the demon Yuan Ling crystal, Yi Xia's aura suddenly soared. Leading the high-ranking officials of the East Sea to the east gate of Zhendong City, she saw thousands of cloud platforms, each 100 miles in length and width, floating in midair one layer after another around Qiqi. On the foremost cloud platform stood a magnificent palace. Surrounded by countless civil and military officials of the Ling dynasty, Zhang Tingyun stood on the high jade steps in front of the palace, looking down in the direction of Zhendong City. Wu Qi could not figure out what this thing was called, but the aura it gave him was stronger than the aura of the human emperor, so he did not bother to separate the bloody aura from it. Moreover, the total amount of this aura was several times stronger than the original aura of the human emperor, so he was even more reluctant to separate the bloody aura. After all, the reproduction speed of heavenly ghosts was several times faster than that of humans. Over the years in Wu Qi's inner world, both the heavenly ghosts and the human race had been reproducing at full speed. The total population of the heavenly ghosts was more than 30 times that of the human race, and the power of faith they provided to Wu Qi was much stronger. Zhang Tingyun was beaten so hard that he felt dizzy and disoriented. Wu Qi and his companions returned to the East Sea City. As soon as they sat down, and before they could tell the high-ranking officials of the East Sea about their whereabouts in the past few days, they heard the roars of flood dragons and the deafening sound of drums and horns ringing out from the east. Zhang Tingyun's furious roar shook the walls of Zhendong City. Chapter 969. In the largest parlor of Wanling Palace, on the top of the city of Wanling, which had been uprooted from the ground, a huge vase made of fine jade was smashed to pieces. The 10-feet-tall vase was smashed to the ground. The loud noise scared the eunuchs and palace maids inside and outside the parlor out of their wits. They all bowed their heads cautiously and dared not to make a sound. Like a madman, Zhang Tingyun smashed all the precious furnishings in the parlor. Even dozens of jade slips, which contained jade essence paste and could be used as spirit medicines that could bring the dead back to life, were smashed to the ground by him. Milky white and light green jade essence paste spilled all over the ground. As soon as these precious things came into contact with the air, they quickly froze, and all their energy dissipated, losing all their magical effects. Lu Bang and Lu Buwei were sitting on the left and right of the parlor, looking coldly at the furious Zhang Tingyun. As the candidate chosen by the celestial court to be the next human emperor, Zhang Tingyun, who had always had a smooth life, had never suffered so much. He had brought a large army to the East Sea, But he was defeated by the bodhisattvas and arhats of the nether branch of the Buddhist League who had suddenly rushed out. First, the water of the yellow spring suddenly gushed out. The extremely filthy water tainted 99% of the magical items of the supreme oracles and immortals of the Ling dynasty who were caught off guard, causing them to lose their spirituality. As a result, the overall strength of these supreme oracles and immortals was immediately halved. Then, Bodhisattva Kittagarbha led many bodhisattvas and arhats to form the yellow spring formation of the 6 paths of reincarnation. With the power of the 6 paths of reincarnation, they crazily slaughtered the soldiers of the Ling dynasty as if they were harvesting leeks. Countless soldiers were crushed by the 6 paths of reincarnation and could no longer come back to life. In the sea of the yellow spring, countless yakshas followed the formation of bodhisattvas and arhats and charged forward, chasing after the army of the Ling dynasty for tens of millions of miles. Zhang Tingyun almost coughed up blood. The water of the yellow spring was so filthy that no one in the Ling dynasty could resist it. Everyone twitched weakly like cockroaches sprayed with insecticide. Even Zhang Tingyun, a peak-level primordial expert, was confused by the water of the yellow spring, and no one could organize an effective resistance. Hundreds of supreme oracles and generals with cultivation bases as high as Hongmeng-Panga heaven had fallen at Zhang Tingyun's side. The heavy loss made Zhang Tingyun's heart ache so much that he almost fainted. As for the casualties of the ordinary soldiers, Zhang Tingyun did not want to hear the post-war statistics at all. 3 courtiers who were ordered to report to him the exact number of casualties were killed by him with a thunderbolt in front of all the courtiers. Until now, he still did not know how many soldiers he had lost. But it was conceivable that it was an astronomical figure that would make Zhang Tingyun cough up blood. The blow this time was sudden and devastating. No one had expected that someone would be so crazy as to bring the water of the yellow spring from the netherworld to Pangu continent, and with such a huge amount of water, which was several times the capacity of the East Sea, he had destroyed the entire army of the Ling dynasty with the water of the yellow spring. Zhang Tingyun was so angry that his internal organs felt like they were on fire. He was so angry that the 3 corpses god jumped up and down, and his eyes were bloodshot. In just one day, he had ordered hundreds of palace maids and eunuchs to be dragged out and beaten to death. Apart from Lu Bang and Lu Buwei, no one dared to show up in front of him, leaving him to vent his boundless anger in the parlor. A crisp sound rang out as the last display in the parlor was smashed by Zhang Tingyun. The broken pieces scattered all over the floor, and Zhang Tingyun's anger seemed to dissipate with them. Almost at the same time as the display was smashed, he returned to his throne with a cold face. As the sky darkened, a few palace maids walked into the parlor, trembling, and replaced the candlesticks with new candlesticks. Inside the candlesticks were candles made of merman's oil. They gave off a faint fragrance that could calm one's mind and calm one's mind. The flame was bright and did not produce any smoke, which made them rarer than any luminous pearls. Wu Qi was sitting upright on the heart of a candle. He had transformed into a wisp of flame and was hiding in the flame, looking at Zhang Tingyun and his companions with a smile on his face. In the heart of a candle next to him, Yi Xia was twisting her waist and flying around. But with Yi Xia's divine ability, Zhang Tingyun and his companions still did not notice that she was making a scene in the candlelight. There was a long silence in the parlor. The 3 of them stared blankly at the broken pieces on the floor for a long time. Finally, Zhang Tingyun said, "It was Bodhisattva Kittagarbha from the nether branch of the Buddhist League who did it. Those people have strange appearances and are very different from the other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the Buddhist League. They can't be impersonated." Lu Bang and Lu Buwei nodded at the same time. "Bodhisattva Kittagarbha," said Lu Bang in a deep voice. "Back then, I was ordered to attend the Golden Basin Orchid Gathering on the Great Vulture Mountain, and I met him among the Buddhist League's Vedanta. That day, he contradicted Lord Buddha, and Lord Buddha could only smile at him. He is one of the trickiest figures in the Buddhist League." With a cold snort, Zhang Tingyun sneered and said, "Do you know why he attacked the army of the Ling dynasty?" Beaming with joy, Yi Xia twisted her waist in the candlelight and spun rapidly like a windmill. As she moved, a breeze blew in from outside the parlor, causing the candlelight to flicker and the fragrance in the air to grow stronger. Liu Bang pondered for a long time with a frown, then said hesitantly, "The Celestial Court and the Buddhist League have agreed that after this incident, the Celestial Court will be in charge of the heaven, the human emperor will be in charge of the earth, and the Buddhist League will be in charge of the ghosts. The Buddhist League has sent 108 Buddhas of reincarnation to live in the netherworld and forcibly take over the control of the 6 paths of reincarnation. Could it be because of this reason?" Zhang Tingyun gave Liu Bang an unhappy look and said angrily, "If there is a dispute within the Buddhist League, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha should have attacked the Great Vulture Mountain with the group of nether yakshas. Why did he attack the army of the Ling dynasty? And during the battle, I called him dozens of times and asked him why he attacked the army of the Ling dynasty, but he didn't answer me. Isn't this absurd?" Lu Bui frowned, his old eyes gleaming. No one knew what he was thinking. Liu Bang also frowned and tilted his head, racking his brains. From time to time, he looked up and exchanged glances with Lu Bui, but it was obvious that neither of them could come to a conclusion. Looking at this, Wu Qi laughed so hard that the corners of his mouth twitched. Yi Xia spun her body more and more complacently, and a colorful light faintly shone out of the candlelight. Wu Qi gave her a fierce look, and Yi Xia hurriedly sat down on the candlelight again. But she was still twisting her body restlessly, blinking at Wu Qi and making faces at him. Several very thin beams of starlight fell from the sky, and soon, 7 or 8 celestial lords in robes and crowns appeared in the parlor with streams of light. Liu Bang hurriedly rose to his feet, cupped his fist, and bowed respectfully to these celestial lords. "Greetings, celestial lords." The celestial lords hurriedly returned the greeting to Liu Bang and said, "You're too kind, King of Han." Zhang Tingyun, who was at the side, also stood up and bowed humbly to the few star lords. Judging from their greetings, these celestial lords were obviously important officials with great power in the celestial court. They were Juman, Tianshu, Migrez, and so on. Wu Qi looked at them curiously, not knowing why they had come to the Ling dynasty in such a hurry. Zhang Tingyun calmly summoned eunuchs and palace maids to clean up the mess in the parlor, put in new furnishings, and moved a few chairs for the celestial lords to sit down. Juman smiled and clapped his hands. A beam of starlight fell from the sky and enveloped the entire parlor. The other celestial lords also attacked at the same time. Colorful lights of various colors swirled rapidly in the room, then compressed into countless runes the size of green beans and branded on every brick, tile, and pillar in the parlor. Wu Qi and Yi Xia smiled at each other. This was a brilliant method. If someone else had used an escape technique to hide here, they would have been cleared out by them. But how could it be so easy to deal with 2 freaks like Wu Qi and Yi Xia? After sealing the entire parlor with a restrictive spell, Juman snorted coldly and said in a low voice with a hint of killing intent, "Your Majesties already know what happened here. Ziwei Lingying, the great celestial emperor, has sent a letter of inquiry to the Great Vulture Mountain about the nether branch of the Buddhist League attacking the army of the Ling dynasty, but Lord Buddha, Amitabha, said that the nether branch of the Buddhist League has never obeyed Lord Buddha's orders, so there is nothing the Buddhist League can do about it." Zhang Tingyun was so angry that the veins between his eyebrows bulged. "There is nothing the Buddhist League can do?" he shouted in a low voice. "Don't tell me they didn't connive it on purpose?" Celestial Lord Migrez said coolly, "Also, according to the spies the Celestial Court planted in the Buddhist League, the master of the nether branch of the Buddhist League, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, who was the Lord Buddha of the Buddhist League 100 generations ago, has also gone through tens of thousands of reincarnations, and is now the emperor of the Shizo dynasty in the western region of Diyu." With a crack, Zhang Tingyun crushed the teacup in his palm. Liu Bang and Lu Bui looked at each other in horror. Could it be that the Buddhist League has done something else besides cooperating with the Celestial Court? Cried Liu Bang. If they can't gather the imperial aura of all the human kingdoms in the outer heavenly realms, how can they compete with Diyu? Wu Qi's eyes went wide as he gave Yi Xia a blank look. How could this little fiend mess up the relationship between the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League? Was it Wu Qi's luck that was too good, or was it the luck of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League? This is interesting. Bodhisattva Kitagarbha is now the emperor of the Shizo dynasty, and he is also desperately searching for the aura of the human emperor. Meanwhile, his former disciple, Bodhisattva Kitagarbha, the master of the nether branch of the Buddhist League, had led countless troops and defeated the army of the Ling dynasty. It's impossible for the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League to not have a grudge against each other. I wonder how the 16 celestial lords should deal with this? Zhang Tingyun crushed the teacup in his palm and asked the most important question: what does Daozu think of this? Celestial Lord Juman rose to his feet, cupped his fist respectfully and said, "According to Daozu's decree, we will solve this problem ourselves." Zhang Tingyun and Liu Bang exchanged a glance. "In that case, it seems that the East Sea can only benefit from this," said Liu Bang with a cold grin. "Send out the army quickly and seize the aura of the human emperor," Zhang Tingyun said through clenched teeth. "And teach the Buddhist League a lesson." Liu Bang and Liu Buwei rose to their feet at the same time and bowed respectfully to Zhang Tingyun. Chapter 970. Without alerting the people in the reception hall who were discussing how to deal with the Buddhist sects, Wu Qi and Yi Xia dashed out of the Wanling Palace hand in hand. The two of them changed into the luxurious robes that the people of the Ling dynasty liked the most and strolled leisurely along the winding mountain road of the Wanling city. From time to time, the soldiers of the Ling dynasty with solemn expressions could be seen walking back and forth on the streets. At the crossroads of the major traffic routes, there would be a general in heavy armor leading a large group of armored soldiers to stand guard. The officials and citizens of the Ling dynasty on the streets were all in a hurry. Some of them even had a panicked look on their faces. They no longer had the arrogant and haughty demeanor they had in the past. Wu Qi held Yi Xia's little hand as the two of them admired the luxurious and exquisite buildings of the Wanling city. From time to time, they would enter some shops that had strange items from all over the world. They would casually choose some items that looked exquisite and fun but were actually useless. This was the first time Yi Xia had come to such a place, and it was the first time she had spent money to buy something. Therefore, she was exceptionally excited. She would spend a huge sum of money to buy almost anything that was new and interesting. In Yi Xia's words, in the past when she saw something good, she would directly kill it and snatch it. This was the first time she had spent money to buy something. Therefore, it was very fun. However, Yi Xia solemnly warned Wu Qi that this kind of prodigal behavior of spending money to buy things could only be used occasionally as a way to relieve boredom. In the future, if he wanted something, it would be better to directly snatch it. The weak were prey to the strong. All the good things in this world should belong to powerful existences like Yi Xia and Wu Qi. Wu Qi had no idea what to do with Yi Xia's logic. It seemed like he could only slowly instill a normal way of thinking into her in the future. In a short period of time, he would not be able to do anything to her. After strolling for 2 hours, Yi Xia was a little impatient. Along the way, countless soldiers of the Ling dynasty looked delicious, but Wu Qi did not allow her to act recklessly. Wu Qi knew that there might be a Daozu from Taoism watching them. Wu Qi could use his own aura to conceal Yi Xia's presence, but if Yi Xia acted recklessly, she might be discovered by a Daozu, and both of them would be in big trouble. Therefore, after shopping for a while, Yi Xia felt bored and wanted Wu Qi to take her back to the front line of the East Sea. Over there, she could also extract enough essence from the dead soldiers to replenish her own consumption, so that she would not have to drool over these soldiers of the Ling dynasty. Wu Qi only smiled mysteriously. He took Yi Xia for a while in Wanling City, then abruptly held her hand and walked to a large, luxurious house not far away. When they walked past the gate of the house, Wu Qi gently blew into the gate. A white stream of cold air silently seeped into the gate and froze the house instantly, sealing all flowers, plants, houses, and pavilions in the house in a thin, cyan blue layer of xianbing. Chuckling, Wu Qi held Yi Xia's hand and disappeared from the street of Wanling City. When they reappeared, they were already above a towering mountain hundreds of thousands of miles away. With a flick of his finger, a fist-sized clump of xianbing emerged and hovered in midair. Holding Yi Xia's hand, Wu Qi plunged into the mountain, leaving behind a thin layer of cold air that looked like mist along the way. About 10 minutes later, dozens of beams of light flew over from the direction of Wanling City at top speed, following the thin layer of cold air left behind by Wu Qi into the mountain. They were a group of over 30 gold immortals, led by Reverend Liang, an old acquaintance of Wu Qi's. Just now, Reverend Liang was having a long talk with a few fellow Taoists in the backyard of the mansion. Sometimes they talked about alchemy techniques, sometimes sword techniques, and sometimes they talked about the profound principles of immortality, and sometimes they discussed the mysteries of the universe which they had comprehended. All of them had the cultivation base of gold immortals, and their spirit, energy, and soul had merged into one. Whenever they spoke, golden flowers would fly out of their mouths, accompanied by faint immortal music. A fragrant mist hung in the air, and beautiful heaven immortal maidservants would come and go, serving fine wine, tea, and various spirit fruits. It was indeed a great abode of immortals. When Reverend Liang was talking proudly, he took out the green peak sword technique he had recently comprehended for his fellow Taoists to examine. He activated a 3-feet-long sword beam and flew up tens of feet into the air, splitting into wisps of sword energy and forming layers upon layers of green mountains in the void, drawing the surrounding earth chi into the mountains. Using the sword beam, he truly simulated the power of countless mountains pressing down on the top of the mountains. Dozens of fellow Taoists applauded and praised at the same time, saying that Reverend Liang's green peak sword technique had reached the acme of perfection, and that it was the best sword technique among all gold immortals. Reverend Liang retracted the sword beam triumphantly, then invited his fellow Taoists to drink to their heart's content and enjoy the endless romantic life of an immortal, as well as the luxurious treatment given to gold immortals by the Ling dynasty. Gradually, these gold immortals began to let loose. Perhaps it was the effect of the alcohol, or because they were fellow Taoists, but Reverend Liang and his fellow Taoists began to discuss the mysteries of the union of dragon and tiger and the coexistence of yin and yang. Then, a Taoist who practiced the art of harvesting put his arms around a few heaven immortal maidservants and exercised his supreme cultivation technique under the comments of his fellow Taoists, performing the mystic art of his sect naked. The heaven immortal maidservants were panting and sweating profusely, making them feel as if their souls had flown out of their bodies. At this critical moment, Wu Qi blew a mouthful of cold energy from the Dark Yin water scripture personally taught by Lady Divine Water of Dark Yin True Water Palace, sealing everything in the mansion in a flash in the Xianbing. Reverend Liang and his companions were not affected, but the few gold immortals who were performing the art of dragon and tiger had their bodies steaming like furnaces. They were tempering the yin and yang energy essence in their bodies, harmonizing the purple mist produced by the dragon and tiger. However, when the cold energy rushed over, it was as if a red-hot charcoal stove was suddenly poured with ice water. They shuddered and nearly had their Tao foundation disintegrated. Miserable howls rang out incessantly as the few Taoists coughed up mouthfuls of blood, which flowed out like a free stream. Reverend Liang and all the gold immortals were horrified. They hastily broke free from the Xianbing, took out life-saving immortal pills, and fed them to their fellow Taoists. But, as they were suddenly tricked by Wu Qi with the cold energy, their vitality was severely damaged, and their cultivation bases dropped by at least 3 tiers on average. The immortals were furious, and Reverend Liang even identified the source of the cold energy. He immediately concluded that the gold immortals from Dark Yin True Water Palace had come to avenge Lady Dark Gold Water. The hair on the back of his head stood on end. Without hesitation, he gathered all his fellow Taoists and hurriedly followed the trace of aura Wu Qi had left behind, chasing in the direction where Wu Qi had fled. In desperation, Reverend Liang did not have the time to report the matter to Liu Bang, and he dared not to tell the whole world about it. He knew very well that he had a guilty conscience when it came to Lady Dark Goldwater. If this scandal were to be spread out, Green City, a sect that prided itself on being a righteous sect, might very well eliminate him. Even though he was the lineal grandson of Green City's patriarch, he would not be able to keep his life. Flustered and exasperated, Reverend Liang immediately encouraged his fellow Taoists to follow the aura and hunt down Wu Qi, and asked them not to alert anyone else. He promised them that it was just a personal matter, and that as long as they could help him kill the enemy who had plotted against him, he would reward them handsomely. According to Reverend Li Yang's calculation, the overall strength of Dark Yin Divine Water Palace was just SOSO, and a few of his fellow Taoists had a cultivation base as strong as Lady Divine Water, so there was no need for them to fear the people from Dark Yin Divine Water Palace. Even if Lady Divine Water invited some fellow Taoists with a similar cultivation base to help, Reverend Li Yang and his gang of scoundrels would be able to deal with them easily, and even if they could not defeat them, they would be able to escape smoothly. Therefore, following the dark Yin aura left behind by Wu Qi, Reverend Li Yang gritted his teeth and chased all the way into the mountains. After flying along a winding valley for a while, the valley in front of them suddenly came to an end, leaving behind a steep cliff. Wu Qi and Yi Xia were standing on the cliff, with Yi Xia hugging Wu Qi's waist and rubbing her head against Wu Qi's chest like a kitten. Reverend Li Yang was taken aback. This was really beyond his expectation. Why didn't he see anyone from Dark Yin Divine Water Palace? Instead, he saw an unfamiliar man and a girl who looked so beautiful and alluring, with a strange and evil charm. In a place where the group of gold immortals could not see, countless Kunwu swords flew silently into the sky, attracting the energy of the surrounding underground energy veins and sealing off the nearby void. The heaven-refining cauldron had shrunk to the size of a palm and was hovering in the middle of the sword formation. With the help of the cauldron, as a supreme artifact of primal, not even the extraordinary artifact crafted by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs could break the formation and bring the souls of Reverend Li Yang and the others away. Reverend Li Yang cupped his fist and bowed to Wu Qi cautiously. "Fellow Taoist, may I ask why you have lured us here?" he asked in a deep voice. Wu Qi gave Reverend Li Yang a look and asked coolly, "Li Yang of Green City?" Reverend Li Yang nodded and said, "Yes." Wu Qi asked again, "Are you now the advisor of King of Han, Liu Bang?" "Yes," said Reverend Li Yang proudly. "I'm now serving King of Han in military affairs." Wu Qi clapped his hands and said with a smile, "Then, you can die now. Do you still remember Lady Dark Goldwater?" Reverend Li Yang was taken aback. He stared at Wu Qi in horror and cried out involuntarily, "Who are you?" Wu Qi did not want to waste any more time talking to Reverend Li Yang. With a sway of his body, he transformed into Amitabha's four-faced golden body, which was unique to the Lord Buddha. He reached out his long arm and grabbed at Reverend Li Yang, unleashing an invisible force that crushed his immortal body to pieces. Reverend Li Yang's soul howled and flew up into the sky, but Wu Qi grabbed it and crushed it with both hands, leaving only a clump of pure energy essence. When the other gold immortals saw how mighty Wu Qi was, they could not help but howl with fear. They dropped to their knees and kowtowed to Wu Qi, begging Wu Qi to spare them. After all, it was not easy to cultivate one's cultivation base. Which of them did not spend eons of hard work to attain the cultivation base of gold immortals? Wu Qi looked at them coldly. With a wave of his hand, a beam of Buddhist light fell on their faces, disintegrating their immortal bodies and crushing their souls. Dozens of energy essences were collected by Wu Qi, and he handed them to Yi Xia. Xia took the energy essence with a big smile on her face, then obediently came to Wu Qi's side and put her arms around his. Wu Qi retracted his Dharma idol, deliberately leaving some clues behind. After that, he put away the sword formation and left with Yi Xia. Several hours later, Liu Bang arrived with a large number of people, only to see bloodstains all over the ground and a trace of faintly discernible Zen power. Chapter 971. In the next 10 days, the Ling dynasty was plagued by troubles. In addition to Reverend Li Yang of Green City, who was in charge of military and political affairs for King of Han Liu Bang, along with dozens of his fellow Taoists, some low-key but important figures in the Ling dynasty were killed in the next few days. Among them were even 3 young star lords who had come down to assist the Ling dynasty. Their heads were taken away in the cave abodes they had built outside the city of Wanling for no reason. On top of that, all of their souls had perished. The extraordinary artifacts crafted by the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs to collect souls and prepare them for deification in the future did not work at all. Whoever killed them must have used a supreme artifact of primal to conceal their aura and isolate them from the senses of the artifacts. That was why their souls could be completely destroyed so easily. The Ling dynasty was shaken. In a panic, Zhang Tingyun, Liu Bang, Liu Buwei, and others made a decision. The Ling dynasty's army quickly broke away from the East Sea, switching from an active attack to a passive defense. At the same time, the Ling dynasty quickly expanded its army and marched in both the north and the south, sweeping through all the human kingdoms from outer heavenly realms like a flood monster. The speed at which outer heavenly realms descended on Pangu continent also skyrocketed. The heaven lords and immortal monarchs who presided over the outer heavenly realms spared no expense to drive the huge landmasses towards Pangu continent. It was estimated that in 2 years at most, all the outer heavenly realms would be reunited with Pangu continent, and the enormous virtues would fall into the hands of the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. At the same time, the Shizo dynasty in the western region went to war as well. They hung up a no-war sign in front of the Flying Bear army led by Gao, but launched a frenzy of attacks in the northern and southern regions, wiping out one human kingdom after another. According to the analysis of Wu Qi and the leaders of the 6 dynasties, both the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty had sensed the treacherous atmosphere between the Celestial Court and Buddhism. Even in private, in a place that Wu Qi did not know, the Celestial Court and Buddhism might have had small-scale, low-intensity conflicts, which led to the current situation. Both sides were working hard to gather the human powers in outer heavenly realms, striving to occupy the largest share of the emperor aura of the human race, and then defeat Yu and his competitors in one fell swoop. The information sent back by Lao AI also confirmed the speculation of Wu Qi and the others. During the time when the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty withdrew their armies and separated themselves from Yu, 3 suzerains of the various Buddhist sects had mysteriously disappeared. According to rumors circulating within the Buddhist League, these 3 mighty existences, whose cultivation bases were almost on par with Amitabha, the Lord Buddha, seemed to have fallen suddenly. The status of the suzerains of the heart, mind, and Vajra in the Buddhist League was far higher than that of the joyful sect, especially the Vajra sect, which was known as the strongest avatar in the Buddhist League. A long time ago, in order to fight for an extraordinary artifact produced by heaven and earth, the suzerain of the Vajra sect had once fought against 12 primordial immortals alone. No matter how they attacked him with flying swords, magical treasures, thunderbolts, flames, and various other immortal magics, his avatar remained unscathed, and he snatched the artifact from the hands of the 12 primordial immortals. After that, it was refined by a reclusive Buddhist League's great benefactor, adding another treasure to the Buddhist League. With the sudden fall of such a formidable figure, there was no need to ask what had happened. While Wu Qi secretly lit the fire for both sides, they also began to take action. The only ones who could stop these small frictions were the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. In short, they did not say anything to stop the actions of their disciples and disciples. The situation had become treacherous and unpredictable, but it was a great benefit to Wu Qi. Wu Qi no longer went out to cause trouble for the Ling dynasty. Instead, he devoted himself to training soldiers in the East Sea, selecting those with outstanding aptitudes from the soldiers and spending a great deal of resources and energy to train them. If a war were to break out in the future, all the ordinary soldiers would be cannon fodder. A single strike from a primordial immortal could topple heaven and earth, and even ordinary soldiers of gold immortal level could not withstand a single blow. To maintain the initiative in future battles, the East Sea needed more primordial immortals. Wu Qi could not help but feel his scalp go numb at the thought of the countless hibernating revered elders in the temple of revered elders of Yu, and the overall strength of the disciples that the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs had hidden for so many years. Once the future was in turmoil, there was no way he could escape from the Great War unless he fled into the chaotic world. But how could Wu Qi be willing to leave everything he had today and flee into the chaotic world to be a hermit? The Dark Een Celestial Tower was fully unleashed. With Wu Qi's current cultivation base at the pinnacle of the Tao-breaking realm, he could accelerate time by 100,000 times. So, A year in the outside world was equivalent to 100,000 years of cultivation for the immortals, oracles, and warriors under his command. Apart from the slight shortage of energy in the spirit cave, everything was going smoothly. Half a year passed quickly in the outside world as Wu Qi built up his military force like crazy. During these 6 months, there was no war in the East Sea and the Western region. The Ling dynasty, the Shizo dynasty, and those human kingdoms were in full swing, and Great Wu, which was under Wu Qi's control, had taken advantage of the situation to annex a great deal of territory and population, snatching many benefits from the mouths of the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty. The interior of Diyu, on the other hand, was peaceful. Emperor Haozuan was working hard to win over the hearts of the people, especially in the southern region that was once occupied by Nuyu. He was patrolling the southern region day and night with many civil and military officials, working hard to manage the people's livelihood and civil affairs. In Yuxiong Plain, several kings of the council were working hard to train the new army. The treasury of Diyu was fully opened, pouring out endless resources, and cultivating the new army that was absolutely loyal to Emperor Haozuan at an incredible speed. Like the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty, Emperor Haozuan also had a plan to defeat all his opponents in one fell swoop. Just when everything seemed to be going smoothly, Wu Qi, who was teaching the mysteries of the heavenly Tao to his many immortals in the spirit cave, suddenly received an urgent message from the outside. A group of emissaries had arrived from Liangzhu with a special edict from Emperor Haozuan, led by Ji Dai, King Yangshan's eldest son. In the spirit cave, Wu Qi sat cross-legged on a cloud of purple mist. Around him were clusters of purple clouds, and countless immortals, demon immortals, and fiend immortals were sitting respectfully on top of them, listening to him explain the mysteries of the heavenly Tao. All the other primordial immortals in Pangu world were very stingy with their understanding of the heavenly Tao, not to mention Wu Qi, who was a peak-level expert of the Tao-breaking realm. They would only give a lecture to their personal disciples once or twice in a period, 3 times at most, and each lecture lasted only a few days. It was the first time in history that Wu Qi had been teaching and answering the questions of the immortals in the spirit cave for 50,000 years in a row. Even the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and 9 Tao patriarchs would not let their disciples take advantage of them like this. Without a great contribution, no one could get a word out of their mouths. It was their great fortune to meet Wu Qi. Now that Wu Qi had received an urgent message from the outside, Wu Qi, who was in the middle of teaching the mysteries of the heavenly Tao, paused. All the immortals around him opened their eyes at the same time, took a deep breath, and retracted the purple mist and golden clouds they had released out of their bodies. Then, they bowed respectfully and waited for Wu Qi's order. After a moment of silence, Wu Qi said coolly, "Take good care of what I've taught you." After another pause, Wu Qi nodded and said, "From now on, I've made a rule. Heaven immortals are outer sect disciples, gold immortals are inner sect disciples, and when you reach the realm of primordial, you will be my personal disciples. All of you must work hard to improve your cultivation base, and don't tarnish my reputation." Countless immortals rose to their feet, dropped to their knees respectfully, and bowed to Wu Qi. Qi answered. These immortals were now the disciples of Underhand sect, including human immortals, demon immortals, fiend immortals, ghost immortals, and many others. Among the human immortals were ordinary humans, longbow people, feathermen, mermen, heaven eye people, and many others. While Wu Qi was teaching the great Tao in the spirit cave, a new batch of disciples would be replaced every once in a while. Underhand sect had developed greatly in recent years, and the overall strength of its disciples was far from what it used to be. With a flash, Wu Qi left the spirit cave. As soon as he walked out of the backyard of the king of East Sea's mansion, Xia suddenly appeared next to Wu Qi. With both hands covered in blood, Xia wiped the blood off her hands intimately on Wu Qi's body and said with a smile, "Bored? How can you be so calm after staying down there for tens of thousands of years? Come with me to hunt whales. I've just killed a great one-horned dragon whale and got tens of thousands of kilograms of supreme-grade ambergris." Putting his arm around Xia's waist, Wu Qi smiled and said, "We'll go later, there are guests coming." Interesting." With a flash, Wuqi left with Xia in his arms and appeared in the great hall of the king of East Sea's mansion in a flash. As soon as he appeared, he heard Yu Qingqing's voice, which was still fresh in Wuqi's memory. The king of East Sea is indeed an honorable man. Why hasn't His Highness come out to greet you? Clad in a black palace dress, Princess Zhongli sat on the throne and looked down at Ji Dai and his men, who were beaming with pride. As for Yu Qingqing, who had his hands clasped behind his back, she did not bother to pay him any attention. Wu Qi's silent appearance next to Princess Zhongli startled Yu Qingqing, Ji Dai, and the others. Two old men with faces as thin as mountain elves hurried forward to protect Yu Qingqing and Ji Dai. Two palm-sized supreme towers emerged over their heads, emanating powerful waves of energy that enveloped the surrounding void. Xia squinted at Wu Qi's side and did not say a word. She looked at Ji Dai and his men with great interest, almost instinctively sensing that some interesting prey had appeared. Standing in front of the throne, Wu Qi cupped his fist at Ji Dai and said with a smile, "Please forgive me for not coming out to greet you, King Qingqiu. I was busy with military affairs." "Oh, may I know why King Qingqiu has come from afar?" Ji Dai, a thin man with a sinister and mean face, pursed his lips into a smile and glanced greedily at Princess Zhonglu and Xia. He did not say a word, but Yu Qingqing took out a black scroll and said in a deep voice, "It's nothing much. The kings of the council have discussed and decided that the king of East Sea will be promoted to the position of king by Shan because of his meritorious service and hard work. As for the military, politics, and civil affairs of the East Sea, King Qingqiu will be in charge." Wu Qi's heart sank. He was promoted to the position of king by Shan and then handed over the vast East Sea and its countless people and soldiers to King Qingqiu, Ji Dai? Wasn't that like plucking peaches? Which son of a bitch came up with this idea? Wu Qi's face flickered. Hundreds of longbow men who were loyal to Wu Qi and stood in the corner of the great hall walked up and surrounded Ji Dai and his men. Chapter 972. The atmosphere in the great hall was strange and deathly silent. Princess Zhongli stared at Yu Qingqing and his companions with a mocking smile on her face. How could a bunch of fools like them think they could rob her husband of his wealth? As for Xia, she was holding Wu Qi's arm with both hands and squinting at Ji Dai and his companions. What a fat sheep! 8 supreme oracles and 8 generals with the cultivation bases of the third Panga heaven. It must taste good to refine them into fiend blood crystals. Ji Dai failed to notice the sarcasm in Princess Zhongli's eyes and the dangerous aura of a predator emanating from Xia's bones. He sneered as he looked at the longbow men around him and said, "What is the king of East Sea trying to do? Are you going to attack me?" The burly longbow men swayed their bodies slightly, their bones creaking. As soon as Wu Qi gave the order, they would pounce on Ji Dai and his companions and tear them to pieces. These longbow men were the descendants of the longbow men whom Wu Qi had saved from Myriad Immortals' planet. In their hearts, Wu Qi was the most sacred and inviolable great magus, their only faith. Wu Qi slowly sat down on the throne, crossed his legs, and looked at Ji Dai and his companions. Then he tilted his head and pointed at the scroll in Yu Qingqing's hand. A crisp ripping sound rang out as the supreme towers hovering over the 2 supreme oracles trembled violently. The restrictive spell they had deployed was pierced by Wu Qi's finger, and the scroll in Yu Qingqing's hand flew up and fell into Wu Qi's hand. The 2 old oracles turned pale with fright, and Yu Qingqing let out a strange howl as he staggered back a few steps. Several supreme oracles and generals rushed forward and surrounded Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing, lest Wu Qi suddenly attack them. The power of his finger just now was simply too frightening. He could not believe that the restrictive spell jointly laid out by 2 supreme oracles was pierced through by him. How strong was his cultivation base? Ji Dai's face turned pale as he realized he had underestimated Wu Qi's strength. But a few years ago, Wu Qi had just broken through to the supreme high priest's strength. How much could he have improved in just a few years? If he had used the profound heart celestial pagoda to accelerate the flow of time and increase his cultivation, then he should be as old as these old priests around him. High priests of the human race could use all kinds of natural treasures to prolong their lives, but very few treasures could keep them young forever. Judging from the vigorous life force emanating from Wu Qi's body, one could tell that he was still in the prime of his youth, unlike the other supreme oracles who were old and withered. Ignoring the tumbling thoughts in the minds of Ji Dai, Yu Qingqing, and the others, Wu Qi unfolded the scroll and gave it a casual glance. Wu Qi was so angry that he almost burst out laughing. He was so angry that he almost summoned Catfish, Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and all the other cannibals here, so that they could skin Ji Dai and the others alive. On the scroll was a long and smelly official document, listing Wu Qi's contributions over the years, praising him for his outstanding contributions, praising him as one of the best pillars in Great Yu, a purple gold beam that supported the sea, a white jade pillar that held up the sky, and a genius who could rule the heaven and earth. At the end of the document, the tone changed, saying that since Wu Qi had made such a great contribution, it was time for him to inherit the title of king by Shan, and that Wu Qi should have a place among the 18 kings of the council. Therefore, Wu Qi was asked to take his family and his trusted guards to Liangzhu, while the affairs of the East Sea, including the war between the East Sea and the Ling dynasty, were all handed over to Ji Dai. The document also mentioned that dozens of palaces and gardens had been prepared for Wu Qi near Liangzhu, including fertile land, which was nearly 1,000,000 miles in circumference, as well as all kinds of treasures and toys. Wu Qi did not take these things seriously. He patted the scroll in his hand and asked Yu Qingqing with a smile, "There's no need to ask, Master Yu. This is your idea, isn't it? When I've stabilized the East Sea, suppressed the eastern region, stationed the soldiers everywhere, trained the army, and strengthened the Directorate of Celestials in the East Sea, you'll come and pick the fruits, right?" Clearing his throat, Wu Qi sighed and said, "What a good plan." TSK, not long ago, the Ling dynasty was still attacking the East Sea, so it was not very peaceful. If King Qing Qiu came here to take over the East Sea, he might be killed by a general of the Ling dynasty. Now that the Ling dynasty has sent its army to the southern and northern regions, and there are signs of war with the Shizo dynasty, you're here. Yu Qingqing chuckled, stroked his long beard proudly and said, "What did the king of East Sea say? This is the need of the state." Lightly tapping the throne with his fingers and bowing his head, Wu Qi pondered for a long time, then nodded slowly and said, "I've read the document. The strange thing is, I have such a large fief in the East Sea, but when I go to Liangzhu, you'll give me a piece of land with a circumference of 1,000,000 miles? 1,000,000 miles is just the land of a county. Can you really do that? The East Sea belongs to your highness, so naturally, the products will belong to you," Ji Dai said coldly. "The king of East Sea has become king by Shan, making him one of the 18 kings of Deyu's imperial council. What an honorable thing it is. Why do you care so much about it?" Wu Qi almost burst out laughing. Was he saying that he cared so much about it? Staring coldly at Ji Dai, Wu Qi said in a deep voice, "Even if I become king by Shan and one of the kings of the imperial council, what about my duties? Every king of the Imperial Council will be in charge of the state affairs and military affairs of Deyu. Why doesn't the document say anything about my duties?" Ji Dai's eyes flickered as he said in a cold voice, "After the king of East Sea is promoted to nobility, what he will be in charge of will be decided by the kings of the Imperial Council." Wu Qi spread his hands and sighed. "So you're saying that I'm just a mere figurehead? You're taking away my property and sending me to Liangzhu to retire? Heh, what do you mean by that? Burning the bridge after crossing the river, killing the donkey after the millstone has been removed. Are you out of your mind? Is this King Yangshan's idea? Or is it some other king who made the decision? DK, does His Majesty know about this?" "King of East Sea, what's done can't be undone," Yu Qingqing said unyieldingly. "It's a done deal." The 8 generals with the cultivation base of Hongmeng Panga Heaven standing next to Yu Qingqing roared, "King of East Sea, please hurry to Liangzhu and promote me to the throne of King by Shan." Their thunderous roars shook the hundreds of long-bow soldiers who had surrounded Ji Dai, Yu Qingqing, and the others, and blood trickled down the corners of their mouths. They roared in unison, their bodies swelling to about a mile tall, and their heads nearly smashed a hole in the ceiling of the Great Hall. Only the great hall in the King of East Sea's mansion was so spacious that it could accommodate hundreds of longbow men who had suddenly transformed into Dharma bodies. Suddenly, a thunderous roar rang out from outside the East Sea city. "King of East Sea, please hurry to Liangzhu and promote me to the throne of King Baishan." The roar shook the houses in the East Sea city, and it was made by at least hundreds of thousands of human warriors whose cultivation bases had reached the realm of second Panga heaven. At the same time, 12 extremely strong waves of magic power enveloped the East Sea city, and their mighty divine senses smashed toward Wu Qi in an unreasonable manner, as if they were going to crush Wu Qi's divine sense into pieces by relying on their numbers. Yi Xia suddenly looked up and asked with a sweet smile, "Can I eat them?" Wu Qi nodded slowly as he sensed the 12 streams of divine sense, which were at the level of supreme oracles. Laughing loudly, Yi Xia reached out her little hand and made a grabbing motion. 12 black ripples that looked like fishing nets flashed in the void, and shrill howls rang out. With a shake of her hand, the black ripples turned into billowing black smoke and disappeared into Yi Xia's palm. Black smoke continued to pour out of the void like an endless river. Horrified screams came from the sky above East Sea City. The terrifying screams lasted for a full quarter of an hour before the black smoke in the void gradually disappeared. Muffled thuds came from the entrance of the hall. 12 dried corpses of old men in black robes smashed heavily in front of the hall's entrance. The corpses that didn't have any water left were smashed into pieces, and a layer of smoke suddenly rose up. The scene was extremely tragic. The 8 supreme oracles who guarded Ji Dai and the others in the great hall swallowed with difficulty. The dead supreme oracles who were killed by Yi Xia were their companions, and they had stayed outside the city to lead the army to threaten the East Sea. But they never dreamed that Yi Xia's means were so terrible that not only had she killed 12 supreme oracles from a distance, but she had also moved their bodies over the great hall and left them there. Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing, who had been arrogant and domineering just a moment ago, turned pale with fear. They stared at Yi Xia in horror and suddenly realized what the aura emanating from Yi Xia was. It was the dangerous aura of a predator at the top of the food chain. It was just that Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing had never realized this, so they had overlooked the dangerous aura emanating from Yi Xia. Yi Xia burped contentedly, then gently patted her belly and said to Wu Qi in a soft voice, "They are very satisfied. I just need a few more." Yi Xia's words made Wu Qi shudder and his scalp go numb. They were the 360,000 children of Wu Qi and Yi Xia. The thought of this made Wu Qi's hair stand on end. He could not believe that he and the patriarch of invisible heavenly fiends had given birth to a group of invisible heavenly fiends. Princess Zhang glanced enviously at Yi Xia's belly and gently rubbed it. She only had one child in her belly, and it would take another 3 eons for the child to be born. Moreover, one could not accelerate time to give birth to a child. One must collect enough energy of heaven and earth from the outside world to make the child grow smoothly. Once time was accelerated, the child might be born prematurely. While the 2 little girls were lost in their own thoughts, Wu Qi slapped the document to pieces. Staring coldly at Ji Dai, he said in a low voice, "I don't think what the document says is good. I want the title of King Baishan. From now on, I, Wu Qi, am to use King Baishan, one of the 18 kings of the Imperial Council. As for the foundation of the East Sea, I can't give it to you." Ji Dai's face twitched. "King of East Sea," he said through clenched teeth. Wu Qi slapped Ji Dai to the ground, nearly killing him. The restrictive spell that the 8 supreme oracles had jointly laid out was broken by him, and the slap sent him rolling on the ground. "Call me King Baishan," Wu Qi said coldly. "Then all of you will crawl out of the East Sea. Who dares to walk on 2 legs? Somebody, call Catfish." Before Wu Qi's voice could fade, a group of murderous and arsonistic fiends of the East Sea, including Ao Buzan, Immortal Jadebone, Catfish, and others, had already broken into the Great Hall. A terrible aura filled the hall as everyone fixed their eyes on Ji Dai and his companions. Yu Qingqing's legs gave way, and he was the first to drop to his knees. Chapter 973. As soon as Yu Qingsheng fell to his knees, he heard Ji Dai's roar. His knees sprang up as if they were loaded with springs, and he trembled as he stood behind Ji Dai. Ji Dai glared at the good-for-nothing Yu Qingsheng, then pointed a finger at Wu Qi and growled, "King of East Sea, you are lawless." Looking coldly at Ji Dai, Wu Qi sighed and said, "King Qing Qiu, what do you think His Majesty will do to you if you force me to lead the people and the people of the East Sea to join the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League after seizing my foundation?" Ji Dai and his entourage suddenly stiffened. The reason for seizing Wu Qi's foundation in the East Sea was complicated, and it involved many things in Liangzhu. But no matter what he did, as Wu Qi said, if he led the people and people of the East Sea to join the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League, Ji Dai would be the first to bear the brunt of it, and even that would not quell Emperor Haozuan's wrath. As for those who had come to the East Sea with Ji Dai, they would implicate their own families, and perhaps their clans would be completely wiped out. Emperor Haozuan's temper was not good nowadays, and if he forced the people of the East Sea to turn against him, the consequences would be immeasurable. Looking at Wu Qi with a trembling face, Ji Dai said through gritted teeth, "How shameless are you, King of East Sea?" Wu Qi crossed his legs and wagged his toes leisurely. "Seizing the foundation of others and trying to reap without sowing? Do you have a mouth full of teeth?" What Wu Qi said was the street slang he used to hang around on Earth. It was a witty remark he used to make trouble. Ji Dai and the others were confused, but they knew it was not something nice. Glaring at Wu Qi for a while, Ji Dai said through clenched teeth, "Since the King of East Sea doesn't want to follow orders, let's go." They turned to leave the assembly hall, but Ao Buzan stood in front of them with his arms around Immortal Jadebone's waist. Ao Buzan stared at him with a pair of strange eyes and laughed evilly. "Want to leave? How could it be so simple? The Lord said that you have to crawl out. Tiske, kneel down, put your hands on the ground and crawl. Crawl like a dog. Otherwise, Lao Tzu will tear you apart." Yuan Qing pulled out his staff and knocked it heavily on the ground, producing a dull thud that shook the entire hall. "Didn't you hear what Master said?" he growled impatiently. "Crawl out now, or I'll give each of you a blow and cut off your roots." Catfish, on the other hand, shook her head and cried out, "Don't scare them, or their flesh will turn sour and taste bad." Gold Horn, Silver Horn, Gold Feather, and Silver Feather had the most direct reaction. Below their waists, they still had the bodies of boys and girls, but above their waists, they had transformed into 4 huge dragon pythons, each measuring 1,000 feet long. Gold Horn, Silver Horn, and Gold Feather spread their thick, ferocious wings at the back at the same time, and the 4 pairs of wings almost enveloped the entire hall. Ji Dai and Yu Qingsheng's legs trembled as a ferocious aura filled the hall. They were so overwhelmed by it that they almost burst into tears. Just then, a series of footsteps was heard. Huang Liang rushed into the hall with nearly 100 captains clad in golden armor. "Your Highness," Huang Liang shouted, "which reckless fool has come to Donghai to court death? Who is courting death, Your Highness? If I don't smash them to pieces today, you'll kick my head like a ball." The captains emanated a mighty aura, and their cultivation bases had all reached the Hongmeng Panga heaven. Recently, Wu Qi had been operating Dark Yin Celestial Tower at full speed, selecting more than 1,000 excellent soldiers from the countless soldiers of the East Sea to train. Now, all of them had achieved something, and on average, they had reached the realm of 2 or 3 stars in the 3rd Panga heaven. The captains brought by Huang Liang were the best among them, and all of them had cultivated the cultivation techniques of the human race to around the level of 5 stars in the 3rd Panga heaven. In terms of both numbers and overall strength, they had overwhelmed the supreme oracles and captains brought by Ji Dai. Ji Dai's face was as pale as snow. Shivering, he turned to look at Wu Qi and said through gritted teeth, "King of East Sea." Wu Qi waved his hand lightly and said, "Crawl out of the city, then bring those lackeys you brought here and leave this place. The next time anyone tries to take advantage of the East Sea, I'll definitely kill his whole family." After pondering for a moment, Wu Qi smiled and said to Yu Qingsheng, "Remember, when you go back, you must tell those who are supporting you in the East Sea that I, Wu Qi, am a loyal subject of Du. I, Wu Qi, am a loyal subject of Du, but don't you dare to plot against me." I'm a loyal subject when you're not plotting against me, but if you dare to plot against me, I'll bring all the soldiers and civilians of the East Sea to the Celestial Court right now. Well, with my current strength and influence, the 6 celestial emperors of the Celestial Court will at least give me the position of a great celestial emperor with real power. Do you understand? With a wave of his hand, he threw another slap at Ji-Dai's face. The invisible slap sent Ji-Dai tumbling 3 times in the air. Half of his face was smashed and all his teeth fell to the ground. I don't care who you are, snapped Wu-Chi. I don't care if you are a king or a supreme oracle, crawl out of the East Sea right now, or Catfish's head had turned into a huge dragon's head. She stuck out her tongue and licked Ji-Dai's face, then shook her head and said, I'm so scared that I can't eat him anymore. Who came up with this stupid idea of seizing the foundation of the East Sea? Wu-Chi glanced over his shoulder at Su Qin, who was standing behind him. Do you think there's something behind this, old mister? Su Qin stroked his long beard and said coolly, it has been a taboo since ancient times for a weak lord to have a strong vassal. Especially to Diyu, your highness is an outsider. Even the members of Diyu's imperial clan and nobles can betray Diyu, let alone your highness, a commoner from the wilderness. After a moment of pondering, Su Qin smiled faintly and said, besides, I'm afraid that Emperor Haozuan, the human emperor. Hee, why don't your highness send someone to Liangzhu to find out what's going on? Wu-Chi frowned and said in a low voice, sending someone is like sending a sheep into a tiger's den. I'll have to go there myself. Glancing at the flying ships that were flying away, Wu-Chi said coolly, but I need to teach them a lesson. I need to let those people in Liangzhu who are spying on the East Sea know that there are some things they can't do, or they will die if they do. Gently patting Jin Jiao on the head, Wu-Chi asked softly, I've been running around these days and haven't had time to take care of you. Well, you must be very hungry these days, aren't you? Jin Jiao's eyes turned green as he pointed at the 300 flying ships and asked, Boss, we've been hungry for a long time. Can we eat them all? Wu-Chi clapped his hands and chuckled. After pondering for a moment, he gave the order, how many flags, armors, and armaments of the Ling dynasty are there in the storehouse of the East Sea? Pick a group of elites and have them change into their armors, then follow me to entertain King Qing Qiu. Send a message to the underhand sect, asking them to pick a group of elites and disciples to act according to my plan. Glancing at the 300 flying ships that were flying away, Wu-Chi said leisurely, just leave a few people to go back to Liangzhu to deliver the message. Yu Qingqing can stay, but as for the others, among the 300 flying ships, Ji-Dai's flagship was hysterically smashing everything in the main hall. He was cursing Wu-Chi and everything related to Wu-Chi like a madman, swearing hysterically that he would kill Wu-Chi and his entire clan, then take Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia into his room and torture them. Standing in a corner of the hall, Yu Qingqing also clenched his fists and swore to himself. But suddenly, both of them shuddered at the same time, and a chill rushed from the soles of their feet to their heads. Chapter 974. The sudden sense of danger made Ji-Dai stiffen. Hurry back to Liangzhu at full speed, he cried out. Hurry back to Liangzhu at full speed. At this moment, Ji-Dai hated the 8 supreme oracles who had abandoned him to the bone. If they had not abandoned him, they could have easily brought the 300 flying ships back to Liangzhu. They were so fast that they would not have to worry about being intercepted halfway. But now, it would take them at least 3 months to get back to Liangzhu, even at the fastest speed. 3 months was more than enough for Wu-Chi to make all kinds of arrangements against him and kill him on the way. Without a primordial expert to hold the fort, his army of 300,000 soldiers might seem intimidating, but what was the use? The 300 flying ships left long white trails in the sky as they sped toward Liangzhu at full speed, ignoring the huge consumption of immortal stones. Even so, Ji-Dai and Yu Qingqing felt uneasy. They kept urging their soldiers to move forward at a high speed, showing no concern for the ship's power core. Even though the ship was trembling and shaking because it had exceeded its limit, they kept flying forward at such a high speed. Fortunately, The flying ships produced by De Yu's military court were of excellent quality, so they did not break down even after flying for 3 days and 3 nights. Directly in front of the ships was a stretch of mountains that stretched for hundreds of thousands of miles, piercing the sky like blades. The terrain of this mountain range was very strange. Every mountain peak looked like a sword that had been stabbed into the ground. The strangely shaped mountain peaks were hundreds of miles tall, standing on the ground. When the strong wind blew across this place, the mountain peaks would tear apart the strong wind and let out deafening noises that sounded like the wailing of ghosts and the howling of wolves, spreading to thousands of miles away. Ji-dai urged the ships to speed forward. The 300 ships plunged into the mountains, flying along a winding valley that was no more than 10 miles wide between the peaks. Having lost the supreme oracles, Ji-dai and the others did not notice the nearly 100,000 elite soldiers in the armor of the Ling dynasty lying in ambush on the nearby peaks. Just as the flying ship flew to the heart of the mountain range, a clanging sound suddenly rang out, and thousands of Ling dynasty's military flags flew into the air. The flags were ragged and full of cuts and holes from swords and arrows, and there were also large patches of blood stains on them, which made them look very glaring. Thousands of flags fluttered in the air, shrouding the hearts of Ji-dai and the others like a dark cloud. Before Ji-dai could give the order to respond, 3 chi energy cannons, a secret weapon of the Ling dynasty, had been loaded at the top of a mountain a few miles away. When Wu Qi saw the cannons seized from a conquered city of the Ling dynasty, Wu Qi could not help but exclaim, "What a spendthrift!" The cannons were not large in size, but the projectiles they fired were astonishing. They were the 5 elements beads condensed from acquired 5 elements energy. These pearls, condensed from the acquired essence of the 5 elements, were the material for crafting superior-grade gold immortal artifacts, but Ling dynasty had developed such a deadly ballista, firing it with these rare pearls as cannonballs. There was no doubt that the power of the 1 chi spirit pill cannon was abnormal. Along with the 3 cannons were 27 5 elements beads. Now, 3 of them had been loaded into the cannons. Standing on a nearby mountain, Wu Qi, clad in the armor of a general of the Ling dynasty, covered his face with a golden mask. He gently waved his hand, and Huang Liang, who was wearing the same outfit, cried out, "Fire!" Amidst the frightening clappers, 3 beams of red light shot out of the cannons and smashed into the formation of flying ships under Ji-dai's command like a hot knife through butter. With a deafening rumble, 18 ships were pierced by the red light, leaving large holes about a mile in diameter in their surfaces. Heavily wounded soldiers could be seen falling out of the holes, blood gushing out of their wounds. Plumes of smoke rose from the ships as they plummeted to the ground. The bright light exploded, and a red shockwave swept across the valley. More than 30 flying ships twisted and shattered in the bright light, and even the soldiers on the ships were blown up into the sky. The power of the explosion of the 3 5-element beads spread out in all directions. 2 lofty mountains were broken in the middle, and huge rocks were sent flying hundreds of miles away, causing sparks to fly out from the surrounding mountain peaks. The huge impact sound was so loud that it made people's eardrums hurt. "King of East Sea, do." Ji-dai rushed out of the main hall of his flagship and shouted, pointing his fingers and shouting. The screams stopped abruptly. Ji-dai looked in horror at the banners of Ling dynasty around him, as well as the elite soldiers armed with heavy crossbows and clad in gorgeous armors that were very different from Great Yu's, who had quietly appeared on the mountains in all directions. On nearly 100 mountains, 100,000 soldiers pulled the trigger at the same time. Each of the 100,000 crossbows was equipped with 12, 24, or 36 bolts. The bolts of the Ling dynasty were very delicate. Arrows of the same length were generally only 1/3 to 1/4 the diameter of De Yu's standard bolts. Therefore, the heavy crossbows of the Ling dynasty could carry more bolts than those of De Yu's. De Yu's bolts were designed to kill with one shot. Even a general would be half dead if he was hit by an arrow. However, the style of the Ling dynasty's bolts was very different from that of De Yu's. In addition to all kinds of armor-piercing and curse-breaking talismans, the bolts also had other useless talismans, such as whistling and glowing. Once the 100,000 crossbow bolts were triggered, over 1,000,000 arrows were shot out, leaving long streaks of light in the air, creating sharp whistling sounds like shooting stars, covering over 200 flying ships. The bolts weaved into a huge net and swept across the ships that did not have time to activate their defensive mechanisms, causing the soldiers on the decks to fall like dumplings. If there were supreme oracles in the army, the defensive mechanisms of the ships would have been activated as soon as possible, leaving no chance for the crossbows to launch a surprise attack. However, Qixia had killed 12 supreme oracles, and the other 8 had abandoned Jidai. Now, there were only a few oracles with low cultivation bases in Jidai's army. All the soldiers on the decks of the ships, which were about a mile long on average, were badly wounded by the bolts. The lucky ones were struggling and moaning on the decks, while the unlucky ones had fallen from the sky into the cloudy valley. No one knew what kind of miserable fate they had suffered. Goldhorn, Silverhorn, and the other fierce beasts under Wu Qi's command, who ate human beings for pleasure, were hiding in the valley, happily opening their mouths to devour the food that fell from the sky. Every drop of the blood essence of these powerful human soldiers contained a strong life force, which was the best tonic for Goldhorn and the others to improve their strength. Amidst Jidai's panicked and disorganized command, over 200 ships that had survived the bombardment rushed out of the valley and headed for Liangzhu as fast as they could. Standing on the deck with trembling hands and feet, Jidai threw his head back and roared, "Why are there soldiers of the Ling dynasty here? Why are there soldiers of the Ling dynasty here?" Yu Qingqing's face was livid. He knew more or less where these soldiers of the Ling dynasty came from, but who would believe him? Where was the evidence? Wu Qi did not order the soldiers to chase after them. Although human soldiers could fly for a short time, it was unrealistic to compare their speed with the ships. Huang Liang led the soldiers back to the East Sea, while Wu Qi and a group of fierce beasts followed Jidai's ship from a distance. After a few more days, an extremely treacherous mountain blocked the way of the flying boat like a screen. Hundreds of miles high and thousands of miles wide, the mountain was pitch black and emanated a ferocious aura. A stream of grayish-white energy shot up into the sky from the top of the mountain and turned into 3 looming gray lotus flowers. Jidai, who was fleeing with a venomous heart, looked at the 3 gray lotus flowers and ordered without hesitation, "How dare itinerant immortals openly cultivate here? What do they think Diyu's decree is? Men, raise this itinerant immortal lair to the ground for me." Yu Qingqing wanted to persuade Jidai, but Jidai would not listen. 30 flying ships with more than 20,000 soldiers rushed toward the mountain. The decks at the prow of the ships opened to reveal powerful heavy-duty crossbows. But before they could fire, a soft cry came from the mountain. Tu Xiaobai rushed out with a group of underhand sex demon immortals. Wielding a pair of huge hammers, she glared at them with her red eyes and smashed the flying ships to pieces with the hammers. One after another, the demon immortals at the rear unleashed their immortal binding chains, demon binding chains, and other restraining magical treasures, capturing all the soldiers. Tu Xiaobai gave Jidai and the others a fierce glare, then unleashed the spiritual pressure unique to a primordial immortal and smashed into them. Jidai and Yu Qingqing coughed up mouthfuls of blood and once again ordered the army to flee at full speed. After fleeing for another 5 or 6 days, Jidai saw a dozen fiend immortals in front of the fleet, clad in black robes and shrouded in roiling fiend auras. They were at most heaven immortals, carrying baskets filled with worthless herbs on their backs. Jidai was overjoyed. Having suffered 2 defeats in a row, he immediately ordered the fiend immortals to be captured alive so he could vent his anger. As a result, the fiend immortals were easily captured. But as soon as Jidai cut off the arm of one fiend immortals, a large cloud of dark clouds came rolling over. More than 1,000 fiend immortals with the cultivation base of gold immortals gritted their teeth and launched a frenzied attack. How could Jidai's army, with only a few hundred second Panga Heaven generals, withstand the onslaught? One flying ship after another was destroyed, and only about 90 managed to escape, while the captured fiend immortals were rescued. Only then did Jidai realize that he had stirred up another hornet's nest. Although the cultivation base of those fiend immortals was weak, They had a strong backing. After being severely wounded 3 times in a row, even Yu Qingxing began to wonder if he and his men had run into bad luck this time. A few more days passed, and they would be back in Yuxiong Plain in a month's time. Suddenly, Ji Dai saw a beautiful girl flying past on a flying sword in a corner of the fleet. For some reason, Ji Dai ordered his men to stop the girl and flirt with her with obscenities. The frightened girl suddenly screamed, "Godfather, someone is bullying Shui Mei." A furious roar towered into the sky as a tricolored flame swept across the sky. The Furious Supremacy 3 flame was cursing Ji Dai's mother, breathing flames that scorched Ji Dai's soldiers, and then burned Ji Dai's thighs into a plume of smoke. Ji Dai howled miserably. Finally, he activated his life-saving talisman and fled back to Liangzhu with Yu Qingxing. The 300,000 soldiers he brought with him were all wiped out. Chapter 975. Standing on a high mountain outside Liangzhu, Wu Qi, Princess Zhonglu, and Yi Xia happened to see Ji Dai fly across the sky in a blood-red beam of light and disappear into the city like a ghost. Wu Qi chuckled. With a thought in his mind, the surrounding earth energy rolled up and wrapped the 3 of them up before plunging silently into the ground. Yi Xia unleashed a 7-colored cloud to shroud the surroundings, and with that, the 3 of them slipped into Liangzhu as if they did not exist. Emperor Haozuan was not in the city at the moment. He was leading the Flying Bear Army to suppress the southern provinces and win over the hearts of the people. Liangzhu's most powerful defensive formation was left unmanned, so no one could find Wu Qi and his companions. There should be Dao-breaking experts in the secret palace of Diyu, but according to the tradition of the human race, such experts would either hibernate or hide in secret caves to cultivate in seclusion. They would never pay attention to the ordinary affairs in Liangzhu. So Wu Qi and his companions entered the city without any trouble, following the aura left behind by Ji Dai into King Yangshan's mansion. Along the way, Wu Qi marveled at how lucky Ji Dai was. As expected of King Yangshan's eldest son, he must have some good life-saving treasures. According to Wu Qi's instructions, Ji Dai's death could be regarded as a warning to those with evil intentions, and Yu Qingxing should be left behind to report back to Liangzhu. But Ji Dai was protected by a spirit talisman, and when he transformed into a blood-red beam of light, even Supremacy 3 flame could not catch up with him and could only watch him flee. Along the way, Wu Qi had given Ji Dai a few ruthless attacks. Perhaps Ji Dai was so depressed that he wanted to kill himself. Although he did not kill him, the effect was not much different, and the psychological blow he suffered was probably much more serious than if he were killed. In a secret cave about 100,000 feet underground in the backyard of King Yangshan's mansion, a spacious stone chamber was as simple and neat as the other buildings in Diyu. This stone chamber was built with black stone slabs that were several tens of feet thick and had a length of 1,000 feet and a height of 100 feet. In this spacious stone chamber, there were only a dozen or so heavy stone stools placed neatly as chairs, and nothing else. Dozens of bronze human hands were embedded in the wall, each hand holding a human head-sized mermaid pearl. Inside the translucent bead, there were faint clouds and ocean waves swirling. The bright light from the bead illuminated the entire stone room. The light shone from all directions, leaving no shadow on the ground. In particular, the mermaid pearl had a kind of strange and mystical ability. Its light was a natural-born forbidden object. In the Buddhist sect, it was also known as the stainless and dustless pearl. Ordinary forbidden spells would emit different colored smokes and smells when they came into contact with the light emitted by the mermaid pearl, which was enough to attract the attention of others. The fact that so many rare mermaid pearls were used as lamps showed that this secret cave was an extremely important place in King Yangshan's mansion. When Wu Qi, Princess Zhonglu, and Yi Xia entered the stone chamber, they were also repelled by the light from the mermaid pearl. However, Wu Qi immediately absorbed the light with the primal purple energy and fused his aura with it. The 3 of them entered the stone chamber steadily and attached themselves to one of the pearls. Hovering amidst the strong light, they quietly looked at the people in the chamber. King Yangshan sat on a stone stool in the middle, his hands on his knees and his face serious. Around him sat 7 kings of the same status as him. Among them, Wuqi recognized King Yinshan, King Tsongshan, King Haoshan, King Dingshan, and King Gushan. All 5 of them were King Yangshan's die-hard followers. The other 2, as they were called, were King Yuanshan and King Jingshan. Clearly, they were the allies that King Yangshan had recruited these days. Apparently, after a few major upheavals, King Yangshan's power in the imperial court of Diyu had expanded a lot. All the kings, dressed in black robes, sat in a semicircle around King Yangshan. Judging from their posture, it was clear that King Yangshan was their leader, the leader of this small group. Everyone sat in the same posture as King Yangshan, with their backs straight, their legs apart, and their hands on their knees. They sat on the stone blocks, giving people the feeling that they really were mountains. Not long after Wuqi and his companions sneaked into the chamber, they heard a loud noise, and then Ji Dai and Yu Qingqing darted out of a corner of the room. A bolt of lightning burst out from the corner and spat them out, then everything returned to normal. Wuqi glanced at the corner and saw a small, short-distance teleportation formation, which could teleport no more than 300,000 feet away. Presumably, it was used to communicate with the ground. Ji Dai's thighs were burned clean by Supremacy 3 Flame's natal true flame, and he was carried into the chamber by Yu Qingqing. Only then did he let out a miserable howl of pain. Trembling, he rolled on the ground, crawled a few steps toward King Yangshan, and suddenly coughed up a few mouthfuls of blood. Judging from his appearance, he looked so miserable that anyone with a soft heart would not have the heart to punish him. But Wuqi could see clearly that the blood he coughed up was bright red. It must have been forced out by himself, not some new internal injury. And, according to Ji Dai's cultivation base, his legs should have recovered long ago. Given the speed at which the cultivation technique of the human race could heal the fleshly body, he should not have come to see King Yangshan with an incomplete body. Clearly, he was pretending to be pitiful. But King Yangshan was not an ordinary man. When he saw Ji Dai's appearance, he snorted coldly and waved his hand, sending out an invisible force that knocked Ji Dai flying away. Ji Dai howled miserably as all his bones were shattered. The blow had almost killed him. "I don't have a useless son like you. You're a waste of my face." King Yangshan growled in a low voice. Glaring angrily at Yu Qingqing, King Yangshan said in a flat tone, "The Flying Bear Army has newly established the Camp of Death, and Ji Dai is its first lieutenant. Master Yu, you can help Ji Dai with military affairs. Now get the hell out of here." Yu Qingqing shuddered with fear. Knowing that King Yangshan had learned that he and Ji Dai had crawled out of the EC city, he dared not to argue. Obediently, he helped Ji Dai up and walked out of the stone chamber. Ji Dai was scared out of his wits as well. His bones were broken, but he dared not to make a sound and let Yu Qingqing take him out. Wuqi and Princess Zhonglu exchanged a glance and smiled. The so-called Death Battalion was an army similar to a suicide squad. Ji Dai's defeat had obviously lost King Yangshan's favor, and he would have to bear the consequences in the future. But then again, it was easy for a suicide squad to make meritorious service. If Ji Dai could fight with his life on the line, perhaps his future would still be bright. King Yangshan, whose face was trembling with anger, cursed in a low voice, "What a useless, unfilial son. He should really be stripped of his throne." "Don't be angry, Brother King," King Yinshan said coolly. "Young people are inexperienced, so a little mistake is not a big deal. It's just that we have to think of a way to get rid of this King Eastsi." Wuqi's ears pricked up at King Yinshan's words. Why King Yangshan and the others were against him, and why they sent Ji Dai to plunder his peaches. These were all questions in Wuqi's mind. Suddenly, King Tsongshan sneered and said, "Those who are not of our race must have a different heart. This guy has snuck into Diyu and has been showing his loyalty. He deserves to die." Wuqi was shocked. What did he mean by, "those who are not of our race must have a different heart"? Why did he say that? Although Wuqi was now cultivating the scroll of stealing and had transformed his body into a chaotic body, and although he was one of the chaos fiend gods in his previous life, he was a real human being in this life. He was not some scourge, and he had no conspiracy against you. So, why did he use this word to describe himself? King Gushan said coldly, "This guy is very powerful now, and he has countless troops under his command. If we confront him head-on, I'm afraid we won't be able to get away with it. If those people know that this guy is the spy you planted on Myriad Immortals' planet, you will be in a very passive position." King Yangshan heaved a long sigh. Frowning, he said in a low voice, "When the Celestial Court wiped out the dozen or so strongholds I had set up in outer heavenly realms, I thought the people of the Spring and Autumn Warring States period in the mortal world had long been wiped out. Who knew they would end up like this?" King Yangshan sighed again and said, "They are very capable. I can't believe they are able to break the Black Celestial Forbidden Curse, and even the ancestor god I worship, Lao Ai, has kept his mouth shut about it. This shows how much their power has grown. If we don't get rid of them, sooner or later, they will become a great threat to me." Wu Qi and Princess Zhangli looked at each other. Their lips moved slightly, and they said the name, Lu Bui, at the same time. Wu Qi's heart was filled with hatred. If he had known this, he would have strangled Lu Bui to death, or captured him alive. Why did he have to leave him in the way? Wu Qi and the 6 states could hide what they were doing from the world, but how could they hide it from the old traitor, Lu Bui? All he had to do was tell Liu Bang about it and send a letter to Liangzhu, and the East Sea's background would be known to the world. Suppressing the anger in his heart, Wu Qi looked at King Yangshan to see what else he had to say. King Yangshan, who was in a very bad mood, kept sighing. After a long while, he shook his head and said, "Ever since His Majesty revealed that he does not want to pass the throne to other princes, and intends to choose one of us to succeed him, I was indeed tempted. And the Black Mountain King was even more overbearing. If King Heishan learns about the King of East Sea's background, it's not a big deal that I can't get the throne, but if the throne falls into King Heishan's hands, what should we do if he wants to settle the score with us later?" King Yuanshan and King Jingshan's faces twitched slightly, but they returned to normal in the blink of an eye. Wu Qi saw the change in their expressions, and King Yangshan seemed to sense it as well. "King Yuanshan, King Jingshan," he said in a low voice, "you and King Heishan are old friends, why don't you?" King Yuanshan and King Jingshan were silent for a long time, and then they shook their heads. They had chosen King Yangshan's ship, so how could they get off? After waiting for a long time and not seeing them move, King Yangshan cleared his throat and said in a flat voice, "Ji Dai is a good for nothing. He has turned a good thing into something so outrageous. Now that the King of East Sea has his guard up against us, things are going to be difficult. In short, we either bring the King of East Sea to Liangzhu and keep him there, or wipe out his power completely. There is no other way." The kings in the chamber exchanged glances. Chapter 976. The few kings in the chamber breathed a sigh of relief at the same time when they saw King Yangshan's palm strike, which was as sharp as a blade. They rose to their feet slowly, ready to bid farewell to King Yangshan, and then split up to assemble their top experts to eradicate the upper echelons of the East Sea. As long as Wu Qi and the other upper echelons of the East Sea were wiped out, it would be a piece of cake to conquer the vast territory and countless people of the East Sea. Just as the kings rose to their feet, time and space in the chamber froze at the same time. Without the slightest resistance, the kings stood stiffly with their knees slightly bent. The jade talismans and jade pendants they wore exploded as if they had gone berserk, and the strong flashes made them look like light bulbs. But these talismans, which were made by the supreme oracles of the secret palace, could not break the frozen time and space around them, and could not save their masters from being imprisoned. Only the space about 10 feet around King Yangshan remained normal in the vast chamber. Sensing the strange atmosphere around him, King Yangshan jumped to his feet in horror and glanced around. Amidst a cracking sound, King Yangshan took out 2 jade talismans that looked like ghost faces and crushed them. A circle of hazy light shone on him, and a low ghostly howl could be vaguely heard coming out of it. A few ghostly shadows surrounded King Yangshan, making his body hazy and making it so that any divine will that tried to get close to him would quickly slip away. Wu Qi clapped his hands softly as he slowly emerged from the glow of the pearl. When he first appeared, he was only the size of a thumb, but gradually he grew larger and larger, and by the time he came before King Yangshan, he had returned to his normal height. With a flick of his finger, a stone block slid behind him, and Wu Qi reached out his hand gracefully to King Yangshan. A nice defensive talisman, but it's useless against me. Please take a seat, Your Highness. King Yangshan's eyes narrowed, but before he could do anything, two terrible divine senses with a strong sense of warning came whistling down from a place he could not perceive. The ghostly shadows around him shattered with a boom, and he staggered back 2 steps before sitting down on the stone block. King Yangshan was shocked. Only now did he realize that in addition to Wu Qi, there were 2 other formidable figures hiding in this stone chamber. Staring fixedly at Wu Qi, King Yangshan asked in a hoarse, hesitant voice, "The Saint Realm?" Wu Qi was taken aback, and then he remembered that the cultivation realms of the human race had their own system. The oracles who were equal to heaven immortals were marked by the symbol of the moon, and the generals were divided into the 9 heavenly realms of the first Panga heaven. The oracles who were equal to gold immortals were marked by the symbol of the full moon, and the generals were divided into the 9 heavenly realms of the second Panga heaven. The oracles who were equal to primordial unity golden immortals were the supreme oracles, marked by the supreme tower, and the generals were divided into the 9 heavenly realms of the first Panga heaven. When one surpassed the primordial realm and stepped into the Tao-breaking realm, the humans called it the Saint Realm. Once they entered the Saint Realm, there would no longer be any difference between priests and generals. Whether it was close combat or spells and curses, they would be extremely powerful. In other words, any expert of the Saint Realm was in existence who cultivated both magic and fleshly body, just like the 2 most famous figures of the human race, the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong. King Yangshan himself was still hanging around in Hongmeng Panga Heaven, but he was knowledgeable enough to easily imprison a few kings of the council, whose cultivation bases were equal to his. And not only did he freeze space, but even time and the activity of their divine will. This was something that only an almighty expert of the Saint Realm could do. Wu Qi nodded lightly and smiled faintly. King Yangshan was stunned when he saw the smile on Wu Qi's face. According to the information provided by Lu Bui, how many years had it been since Wu Qi began to cultivate seriously? And how many years had it been since he entered Panga continent? Even if he had a rare constitution that allowed him to cultivate both magic and fleshly body, how could he have stepped into the Saint Realm? And it seemed that his cultivation base was extremely astonishing, for he could imprison a few kings of the council without batting an eyelid. No one who had just stepped into the Saint Realm could do this. The Saint Realm. King Yangshan heaved a long sigh and said, "The cultivation techniques of the human race are the fastest, but after stepping into the realm of supreme heaven and the realm of primordial, the speed has slowed down. Compared to the short lifespan of the human race, be it the oracles who have stepped into the realm of supreme heaven or the generals who have stepped into the realm of primordial, they will not have enough time to break through the Saint Realm. In order to do so, time is not a problem. The key is one's own aptitude and fortune." With a wave of his hand, Wu Qi produced a small tea table, a small teapot, and 2 exquisite teacups out of thin air. Then, Yuan Ling true flame sprayed out of his palm and boiled a pot of innate true water taken from Yuan Ling's nether realm, then threw in a few tea leaves from Yuan Ling's nether realm. These tea trees were planted by Yuan Ling himself, and the seeds were collected from the first innate tea tree, which was a real innate spirit root. As he boiled the tea, Wu Qi smiled and said, "My aptitude is very good, and my fortune is good. That's why I was lucky enough to step into the Saint Realm in such a short time. To tell you the truth, Your Highness, Wu Qi is now at the peak of the Saint Realm." King Yangshan jumped to his feet in horror and stared fixedly at Wu Qi, unable to speak for a long time. The peak of the Saint Realm? How could he be at the peak of the Saint Realm? This was ridiculous. The 2 sacred emperors of the human race, the Yellow Emperor Xinyuan and the Yen Emperor Shenong, were only at the peak of the Saint Realm, and they often went to Empress Wa's palace to listen to the teachings of the Wahuang clan. It had taken them countless years and countless virtues to reach this level. So, how could Wu Qi have reached this realm so easily? The more the tea was boiled, the more fragrant it became. Wu Qi took out a few jade bottles the size of a thumb and dripped a few drops of rare natural treasures, such as the 100-million-year-old hollow azurite, which came from Yuanling's nether realm, into the tea. Since the fall of Yuanling, until Wu Qi, the reincarnated man, returned to Yuanling's nether realm and took back his lair, he had accumulated a lot of these treasures. There were exactly 2 cups of tea in a pot the size of a fist. Wu Qi poured a cup of tea for King Yangshan, then carefully handed it to him. "Your Highness, try this cup of tea. The medicinal strength is very strong. Your Highness is now at the 6 stars realm of Hongmengpanga heaven, isn't it? I didn't notice that your Highness's cultivation base was hidden so deeply before. This cup of tea should be able to help your Highness advance by 1 star. King Yangshan took the cup of tea, gave Wu Qi a look, clenched his teeth, and poured the tea into his mouth. As soon as the hot tea entered his mouth, it turned into a violent stream of energy that rushed through his body. A series of cracking noises rang out inside of him, and in just a quarter of an hour, his body suddenly grew about half an inch taller. A crack appeared on his forehead, from which a layer of dead skin began to peel off. As Wu Qi had said, his cultivation base had broken through a minor realm. Wu Qi picked up the cup and drank it in 1 gulp. Although the tea contained a huge amount of energy, it only had a strong effect on those in the realm of Tao reasoning. For experts of Wu Qi's level, ordinary natural treasures and innate spirit roots were of no benefit to his cultivation base, unless they were eaten as meals. At most, they could be used as mouthwash to improve the taste. Putting down the cup, King Yangshan said coldly, "Thank you, thank you." Wu Qi dropped the cup and said with a chuckle, "You flatter me." This cup of tea is Wu Qi's way of returning the favor. King Yangshan was taken aback. "What favor do I owe you?" he asked in surprise. Staring into King Yangshan's eyes, Wu Qi said leisurely, "When I first came to Panga continent, King Yangqiu took good care of me. Later, it was with the help of your Highness's power that I gradually achieved what I have today. If I hadn't been under your Highness's protection, I'm afraid I would have been killed by some malicious people." Lightly tapping the tea table with his fingers, Wu Qi sighed and said, "Take the army of hundreds of millions of soldiers in the East Sea for example. If I hadn't drawn that energy vein from Yuxiong Plain, how could I have trained so many soldiers? If I hadn't been your Highness's confidant, appreciated by Emperor Haozuan, and made some contributions, how could I have received such treatment? So you know." King Yangshan snapped. With a flip of his palm, Wu Qi sent out a gust of evil wind, forcing all of King Yangshan's words back into his stomach. "Do you want to hear what I'm thinking?" Wu Qi said with a cold grin. "In fact, I don't mean any harm to you. I just want to have a stable foundation for me and the people around me, so that we can live a good, carefree life. The East Sea is more than enough for us to live a good life." With a sigh, Wu Qi rose to his feet, shook his head and said, "Thao and I are brothers. If you hadn't schemed against the East Sea, I would have been working hard for you. At the very least, I would have wiped out the Ling dynasty and made the Celestial Court suffer. But you shouldn't have listened to Lu Buwei." With a strange smile on his face, Wu Qi shook his head and said, "His plans have been ruined by me several times. So many of his relatives and clansmen have died because of me, and he is now an important minister of the Ling dynasty. You schemed against your own minister because of the words of someone from an enemy dynasty. You are so stupid that I don't even want to say anything." A clump of Pangu's sacred energy emerged from Wu Qi's palm, turning into a nebula and wheeling rapidly in his palm. Staring at the clump of energy, Wu Qi sighed and said, "What do you mean by those who are not of our race must have a different heart? Hee, can't you see? I'm a real human being, except that I'm not a native of Pangu continent. You shouldn't have schemed against me, because I mean no harm to your Highness and Gao." With a sigh, Wu Qi rose to his feet and said with a smile, "The favor has been repaid, and the matter has been cleared up. As for what to do in the future, it all depends on your Highness's decision." Tilting his head, Wu Qi said in a frivolous manner, "But, Since your highness and all the kings of the council have made it clear that I may cause harm to you, then I'll do a little harm to you. Well, of course, as long as your highness is not stupid enough to reveal my identity, the king of Black Mountain will not be able to use my background to attack your highness. Your highness is still very confident in inheriting the throne. With a loud laugh, Wu Qi transformed into a beam of green light and disappeared into the distance. Yi Xia and Princess Zhonglu followed closely behind Wu Qi. The confinement around them suddenly vanished, and the few kings of the council continued to rise to their feet as if nothing had happened. It was as if what had just happened did not exist in their senses. Looking at the bare stone chamber, King Yangshan felt a chill in his heart. He had no idea what Wu Qi was going to do, or how he was going to harm you. All of a sudden, the surroundings began to shake violently. As the kings rushed out of the ground, they soon received a piece of earth-shattering news. The Panga's map, a secret treasure hidden in the depths of Dayu's palace, had been taken away by an unknown person, and the 12 supreme oracles guarding the treasure were all knocked out before they could even see who it was. All their belongings were robbed, and even their supreme towers were opened by someone with a mystic art. All their life savings were taken away. King Yangshan's vision darkened, and he almost fainted. Chapter 977. Emperor Haozuan was touring the southern region and not in Liangzhu. Together with Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia, Wu Qi easily snatched the Panga's map from the secret vault in the deepest part of Dayu's imperial palace and robbed all the oracles guarding it. It was Yi Xia's wicked hobby. Although Wu Qi had stopped her from turning these oracles into dried corpses, he could not stop them from becoming poor. After sending Princess Zhonglu and Yi Xia back to the East Sea to guard against King Yangshan and others doing anything to the East Sea, Wu Qi brought the Panga's map to Greathorn's lair. It happened that Yao Ling was visiting Greathorn's, so Wu Qi and the two of them opened the Panga's map and were admiring the extraordinary artifact that was said to be the Great Saint Panga's cornea. Wu Qi thought the origin of the artifact was quite reliable. If it was not the organ in Panga's own eye, what other artifact could easily monitor everything on Pangu continent at any time? Even the slightest changes in the underground energy veins would be reflected by the artifact. So, the origin of the artifact could only be explained by the Great Saint Panga's cornea. The Panga's map had no specific entity. It was just a drifting mass of colorful light. If one shrunk it, it could shrink to the size of a palm, and if one wanted to expand it, it could become tens of thousands of miles or even millions of miles in circumference. As long as one wanted, it could expand almost endlessly. Once the colorful light expanded, there would be a light screen in it that reflected the mountains and rivers on Pangu continent. By communicating with it with divine sense, one could see what was happening somewhere on Pangu continent at any time. At the moment, Wu Qi was communicating with the light screen with his divine sense, focusing his attention on the sky above Liangzhu. The image of Liangzhu appeared in the light screen, which had expanded to about a mile in circumference. Nearly 100 supreme towers could be seen hovering over the city, and the imperial palace was densely packed with soldiers. Countless civil and military officials of Dayu were scurrying around the palace like ants on a hot pan, throwing the whole city into chaos. Some supreme oracles had set up altars on the surrounding mountains, trying to activate some restrictive spells to conceal the city, but nothing could escape the surveillance of the Panga's map. After all, Liangzhu was built in the middle of Yuxiong Plain, which was said to be the Great Saint Panga's heart. So, all the defensive spells in the city were laid out with the infinite energy of Yuxiong Plain. The special terrain determined that Liangzhu City had no defensive power in front of Pangu's map. It was like a giant trying to see the lines on his palm. How could a few germs stop a giant from doing that? While Wu Qi's book, Tian Nation's Qi, who of nation of Pipu Ping, Shan, Mountain Yu, spirit of the Ling, the Wu of mountain of, King Wu Long's mountain Ming dynasty, Tian, county, Mu Hua Yu Ling Hu Wu Yu of. While drinking, Greathorns laughed and said, "What a great treasure! It can see everything in and out of Liangzhu clearly. Tisk, it's indeed a great treasure." Then he looked at Wu Qi in confusion and said, "But why did you take this thing? It's an extraordinary treasure given to the human emperor by the Wahuang clan to monitor the whole Pangu continent. Now that you've taken it, the Wahuang clan will come after you in the future." Wu Qi smiled indifferently. The Wahuang clan was trapped in her house by the 7 old monks, and by the time she came to settle the score with Wu Qi, the storm would have long passed. By then, Wu Qi would have successfully fused with the Tao, and he would not be afraid even if the Wahuang clan resorted to violence. Besides, he did not take the treasure to attack the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. What excuse did the Wahuang clan have to come after him? As he touched the Panga's map with his finger, colorful ripples spread across the colorful light screen. Wu Qi told Great Horns and Yao Ling why he had taken the treasure, to refine an extraordinary treasure that could monitor all living beings on Pangu continent. Once they died, their souls would be forcibly sucked into the treasure, and a passage would be built inside it that led directly to the 6 paths of reincarnation. Once the souls were sucked in, they would be sent directly into the 6 paths of reincarnation, and there would be no chance for them to become deities. Great Horns's eyes gleamed as he listened, while Yao Ling twisted her waist excitedly, causing her 100-mile-long dress to flutter like a cheerful bird. The means by which the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs became deities was nothing more than an extraordinary treasure that could suck in the souls of suitable people. Like Wu Qi's idea, the treasure could monitor the entire Pangu continent, and once a suitable person died, their souls would be immediately sucked in and stored in the treasure, waiting to be conferred deities. It was conceivable that the souls of those who died would be strictly screened, and only those who were inclined to the Celestial Court or the Buddhist League, or those who had some special bloodlines would be sucked in. Needless to say, those who were inclined to the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League were conferred as celestial lords, which was in their best interest. But for those with special bloodlines, that was because some ancient stars could only be better fused with their natal star power by possessing unique bloodlines. If it were an ordinary bloodline, it would be impossible for them to mobilize its full power. So what was the point of being conferred as celestial lords? It would be a great victory for the Holy Alliance if they could take away half of the deities reserved by the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League. Great Horns rubbed his palms excitedly. He threw his head back and roared a few times, then turned to stare at Wu Qi and asked, "How do I craft this thing?" Wu Qi narrowed his eyes and smiled confidently. "Don't forget what I'm famous for among the Chaos Fiend gods. I may not be as good as you in other fields, but when it comes to artifact crafting and pill concocting, those few old fellows can probably be a match for me, right?" In terms of artifact crafting, even after so many years, Wu Qi was still confident that he could beat the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. They had established sects and worked hard to expand their power. In other words, they did not have much time to study an unorthodox art. They were all Tao fusing experts, which meant that they had spent all their efforts in studying the heavenly Tao and cultivating their foundations over the years, and they did not have much time to waste on an unorthodox art such as artifact crafting. Therefore, Wu Qi was confident that he could craft the Panga's map into a powerful artifact that was more powerful than the artifacts in the hands of the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. He could even figure out what they had used to craft the artifacts they had now. The cosmic mirror of rivers and rivers of the Celestial Court was also a spirit artifact that could allow them to see the entire Pangu continent in an instant. They must have used it as the foundation to craft the artifacts. Compared to the Panga's map, the cosmic mirror of rivers and rivers of the Panga's map was still an exotic artifact, and it was not as effective as the former in patrolling Pangu continent. On top of that, Wu Qi's artifact crafting technique was better than the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. As long as there was a powerful figure presiding over it, Wu Qi was confident that he could make them vomit blood with anger. Great Horns and Yao Ling's eyes gleamed with excitement as they listened to Wu Qi's explanation. They immediately tore open the void and roared a few times. Before long, Wu Divinity, Lord Changmu, and Lord Wuling, the 3 Tao fusing experts, arrived as well. After hearing the news, the Universal Light God Lord, whose body was made of countless red light balls that gathered and scattered like a group of fireflies, rushed over after hearing the news. The beautiful woman, Green Lady, who rode a 100-legged beetle the other day, also rushed over after a quarter of an hour. Following closely behind her was Old Cloud Lord, whose body was made of the first strand of cloud in the innate world. The last to join in the fun was Lord of Light, who had a bull's head and a human body, with a long, sharp horn growing out of every vertebra from his neck to his tailbone. These people had different lives, but they were all supreme existences in the realm of Tao fusing, and they were unrestrained people who loved freedom. The other members of the Covenant Alliance were setting up some means to target the Celestial Court and the Buddhist League in other places, so they were the only ones who could come now. As the reincarnation of Yuan Ling, the number 1 chaos fiend god in alchemy and artifact crafting, Wu Qi told everyone his plan. The group of almighty experts clapped and laughed happily, saying that it was the best way to deal with the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs. They wanted to choose the right people to sacrifice and send their souls to the deification realm to strengthen the Tao League and the Buddhist League. If that was the case, they would take drastic measures to ruin their plan. In particular, Lunyang, who was riding on a 100-legged beetle, promised Wu Qi that if he could really refine the Panga's map into a suitable treasure, she would explain the matter to the Wahuang clan afterward, and she would certainly not let the Wahuang clan cause trouble for Wu Qi. Yao Ling also made the same promise. After all, as one of the few women among the Tao fusing experts, they had a good relationship with the Wahuang clan, so it was not a big deal for them to come forward and ask for a favor. After getting their assurance, Wu Qi put down the last bit of worry in his heart and began to make a thorough arrangement. To refine the treasure in Wu Qi's mind, the Panga's map alone was not enough as the main material. He needed countless other auxiliary materials, all of which were extremely rare innate divine objects. It took Wu Qi 3 days and 3 nights to come up with a list of all the materials that he could possibly use, and those that he had to use. What surprised Wu Qi was that they were worthy of being experts of the Tao fusing realm. Although Great Horns and the others knew nothing about artifact refinement and pill concoction, as supreme existences of the Tao fusing realm and standing at the pinnacle of Pangu continent, they had collected countless materials over the years and carried them with them. He had been worried that he would not be able to gather all the materials, but with just the private collections of Great Horns, Yao Ling, and Duke Wuling, he had gathered all the materials Wu Qi needed. Wu Qi did not stand on ceremony. He immediately asked for a lot of natural treasures that they could not use but were of great use to Wu Qi, and these people generously emptied their inventories and gave them to Wu Qi. After all, Great Horns and the others knew that these things were just decorations in their hands, but when they were in Wu Qi's hands, only God knew what he could make out of them. A direct conflict with the 7 Buddhist patriarchs and the 9 Tao patriarchs was likely to break out in the future, and perhaps an extra innate spirit artifact would give them a better chance of winning. With these materials in hand, Wu Qi gathered the people present and ordered them to breathe out their natal true flames. With the help of their flames and his Yuan Ling true flame, Wu Qi released the Panga's map into the heaven-refining cauldron. Everyone's natal true flames melted into a purple flame that looked like a crystal, and Wu Qi carefully put it into the cauldron. Dark In's celestial tower flew up from the top of Wu Qi's head, and the time around him suddenly sped up by 100,000 times. Great Horns and the others casually cast a beam of light at Wu Qi's Dark In celestial tower, speeding up the time by 1,000,000 times, so much so that Wu Qi almost could not get used to it. After a moment of suffocation, Wu Qi finally got used to it, and he devoted all his mind to the cauldron. Chapter 978. The Ling dynasty obediently withdrew all its forces from the attack on the East Sea, and Princess Zhongli did not want to waste her forces by stirring up disputes. Every day, she was busy restraining Xia, preventing her from stirring up trouble. The nature of shapeless heavenly devil was to kill, rob, and stir up trouble. An ordinary life was not suitable for a fiend ancestor like Xia. Chu Ping smiled lightly and said, "How about this? How many points are the heads of the emperors of the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty, the heads of their civil and military officials, the heads of their ordinary soldiers, and the immortals of the Celestial Court and the monks of the Buddhist League. Their cultivation bases are not equal, and they are worth a lot of points. Let's record the total number of points one by one, and meet again in the future, and the one with the highest total number of points will be the winner. What do you say? Princess Zhongli had distributed countless armaments and provisions to the 6 dynasties. Even Xiang Yu and Hu Hai, the 2 generals that Wu Qi had focused on training, were allowed to return to their respective dynasties. After a busy day, the 6 dynasties quietly left the territory of the East Sea. Du Yu was shocked, but he did not take it seriously. Da Qin, Great Chu, Great Yan, Great Zhao, Great Qi, and Great Wei. Who knew where these small human kingdoms came from? Du Yu had too many things to worry about now, so he did not care about the disputes of these small kingdoms. If the 6 dynasties had done this, it would have been a little suspicious of tearing down the East Sea. But now, the emperors of the 6 dynasties could be considered as Wu Qi's father-in-law, and even the civil and military officials of the 6 dynasties were 100% Wu Qi's father-in-law. If they wanted to lead their soldiers and people out of the East Sea to rebuild their power, there was nothing to argue about. While Princess Zhongli was busy, on the summit of a high mountain outside the East Sea city, in the temporary imperial residence of the Qin Emperor Yingzheng, the emperors of the 6 states were sitting around a round table. In front of each of them was a small gilded lacquer plate, on which were exquisite wine pots and wine cups, as well as a few exquisite dishes to go with the wine. Chu Ping raised his brows, Yan Dan rolled his eyes, Tian Wen and Zhao Xing did not say anything, while Wei Wuji, the toughest and most combative of them all, gave a hideous laugh, stared at Yingzheng and said, "Yingzheng, what do you mean by that? If you want to be a beast, then go, but don't drag us down with you." Yingzheng nodded slowly. He gave the people around the round table a look, sighed and said, "In those days when Da Qin unified the 6 states, it is a pity that I could not kill all the emperors with my own hands." He swept the small lacquer plate in front of him to the ground, smiled proudly and said, "But it is true that I do not have the intention to kill you today, but—" Yingzheng, Chu Ping, Yan Dan, Wei Wuji, Tian Wen, Zhao Sheng, and the emperors of 6 states were drinking and enjoying the peach blossom forest outside the hall through the open floor-to-ceiling window. Yingzheng had chosen a good place to build his temporary imperial residence. The climate of this peach blossom forest was at least 10,000 years old. The trunks of the trees were twisted like dragons, and the branches were as hard as steel. The few leaves on the trees were lined with large peach blossoms with red petals and green pistils. The peach blossoms on the trees looked like they were on fire, dyeing the entire mountain red. With a slurping sound, Yingzheng tipped the wine pot over, sucked the last drop of wine into his mouth, and gave the pot a strong shake to make sure that there was no more wine left in it. He put down the wine pot, lightly tapped the round table with his finger, and suddenly breathed out a long sigh and said, "What a wonderful time, beautiful scenery, fine wine, and delicious food. Life is like raising a pig, and you and I are both animals." Isya laughed. She sat down excitedly at the round table and began discussing the details of the bet with the 6 crafty emperors. As for the sudden haunting in East Sea City, where people stripped naked and ran wildly around the city in broad daylight, or some other strange things, these were, of course, the little tricks that Isya came up with out of boredom. Invisible Heavenly Fiend had such a nasty character, and what could you do to her? Princess Zhongli could only spend her days putting out fires, which made her look haggard and haggard. Yingzheng, who was waving his arms and legs excitedly, sprung to his feet and cried out in a stern voice, "She has won the bet. Your Majesties are all heroes, so why can't we? Even those who are ordered around like dogs dare to fight for the human emperor, so why can't we? Your Majesties, in the past, the strength of the 6 states was weak, and we had to seek refuge in the East Sea. But today we are strong and have fought many wars for the East Sea, so we have repaid the favor." Wei Wuji laughed and said, "When have the soldiers of Wei ever been any weaker than Great Xiao?" Yan Dan grabbed the wine pot and poured himself some wine, but it suddenly turned into a wisp of smoke and dissipated in his palm. "Since we entered the East Sea, life has indeed become much more peaceful," Yan Dan said with a sigh. If it were not for the fact that Princess Zhongli could still control Isya, She would have long been in cahoots with Catfish and the other ferocious fiends under Wu Qi's command, and gone to harm the Ling dynasty. King Yangshan knew that those who came with good intentions would not come with good intentions. The fact that the 6 states had openly flashed their banners proved that their overall strength could not be underestimated. Yi Xia's eyes flickered with an amused but dangerous gleam. Ying Zheng and the others exchanged a glance, then suddenly burst out laughing and said, "That's good, that's the best. Since Miss Yi Xia has said so, what else do we have to say?" Ying Zheng shook his head and sighed. "I thought all of you had been raised into fat pigs by the comfortable life in the East Sea. He. After laughing for a while, Ying Zheng gently tapped the round table with his fingers, then looked up at the sky and sighed. "We have more than 100 million soldiers and countless people. Do you still remember who you are? We are the monarchs of the 6 states, the mighty lords of the warring states." Yen Dan stuck out his chest and said proudly, "I'm afraid we can't kill each other now. So, let's use those pigs and dogs to decide who is the winner. Whoever can take the heads of the emperors of the Ling dynasty and the Shizo dynasty will be the winner. What do you think, your majesties?" As the sea breeze blew, flower petals drifted down with the wind and turned into red tornadoes that soared into the sky. The scenery was indescribable, and only those who were in it could understand its soul-stirring charm. But the 6 men sitting in the hall were all resolute, and could even be considered cold and indifferent. They just watched the beautiful scenery quietly, and no one said a word. There was no war in the East Sea. Ying Zheng gave Wei Wuji a sidelong glance and said with a cold grin, "TSK, you still have a temper?" "Why don't I have a temper?" Wei Wuji said proudly and coldly. Princess Zhonglu was happy to see this. She generously divided the huge army in the East Sea into 7 equal parts, and gave each of the 6 states 1/7 of the army. Moreover, Princess Zhonglu also promised that as long as the 6 states needed it, the new soldiers trained in the East Sea would be given priority to the 6 states. Ying Zheng let out a long and loud laugh and said, "That's great. Who do you think that Zhang Tingyun is? In my opinion, he is nothing but a foppish man who is worse than a pig or a dog. How dare he covet the throne of the human emperor? If your majesties have the heart, let us lead the army of the 6 states and turn Pangu continent upside down." Now that Princess Zhonglu was in charge, Yi Xia had no place to go, so she could only focus all her energy on harming the soldiers in the East Sea. She had hundreds of millions of incarnations, trained these soldiers with the cruelest means, and then tortured and killed them in their dreams. She had tortured the latest batch of soldiers in the East Sea until they were as crazy as lunatics, but their fighting strength was indeed 50% stronger than that of ordinary soldiers of the same cultivation base, which left Princess Zhonglu speechless. "The army of Great Qi is ready," said Tianwen coolly. The 6 men laughed and clapped in unison, and were about to clap their hands to make the agreement. On behalf of Wu Qi, Yi Xia made a bet with the emperors of the 6 states. They had calculated in detail how many points each person from the Ling dynasty, the Shizo dynasty, the Celestial Court, the Buddhist League, and other human states were worth, how many points they would get if they were killed, and how many points they would get if they were captured alive. After that, they all swore that they would never cheat in the bet. After the bet was made, the matter of the 6 states leaving the East Sea and setting up their own states was settled. A faint, fierce aura spread out from the bodies of Yen Dan and the others. Some people in the East Sea city happened to be looking at the mountain on this side. They were shocked to find that, starting from the top of the mountain, the peach blossoms all over the mountain were withering, and the once red mountain had suddenly turned a dead gray. All the life force of the peach trees was gone, and even the grass under them had died. All of a sudden, a colorful light flickered on the round table, and Yi Xia abruptly appeared in front of the 6 men. She rolled her eyes and gave the 6 men a glance. Suddenly, she laughed evilly and said, "Why is there no position for Yi Xia in this fun event? How about adding the East Sea? If Yi Xia wins the East Sea in the end, all of you will willingly serve him as the human emperor. What do you think?" These dishes were exquisitely prepared, and the ingredients used were the most precious and delicious ingredients from the bodies of the mountain spirits and aquatic monsters. For example, one of the dishes, the carp whiskers in cold sauce, was made from the spirit of a 1,000-year-old carp, which had cultivated into the nascent soul realm. Not only were the whiskers of the carp crisp and tasty, but they also had the effect of calming the mind and strengthening the physique. If it had not been for the large army of aquatic demons in the East Sea, how could ordinary people have such a good meal? The army of the 6 states was going to leave the East Sea and re-establish themselves. It was a very complicated issue, involving the division of the soldiers and the migration of the people in the East Sea, as well as the need to replenish the 6 states with all kinds of armaments, salaries, rations, and countless other materials. Wei Wuji clapped his hands and praised, "Wonderful! Let's do it this way. Whoever gets the highest total score will be wholeheartedly supported by the others to become the human emperor and unify the Pangu continent. What do you think of this idea, Your Majesties?" However, the aftereffect of Yi Xia's training of the new soldiers was that there were 67 camp howls in just 1 month in the East Sea. In the chaos, tens of thousands of soldiers were seriously injured, countless others were lightly wounded, and the frenzied soldiers nearly destroyed half of the East Sea city. That was all. This was the price of raising the overall strength of the soldiers trained by Yi Xia by 50%. Yingjing fixed his eyes on Yan Dan and said, "Yan Dan, what do you think we should do?" King Yangshan, on the other hand, nearly fainted again. Staring coldly at Yingjing, Yan Dan sighed and said, "I still remember that I sent Jing Ku to assassinate my eldest brother, but I failed to kill him. What a regret." 3 months later, the banners of the 6 states were raised at the same time in the northern region of Diyu. Chu Ping narrowed his eyes and tucked his hands under his sleeves. Suddenly, he cried out in a long voice, "I have come to Pangu continent, but if I have to live under the protection of the East Sea for the rest of my life, I will be lonely. Chu Ping may like to recite romantic songs, but I prefer to lead the mighty army of Great Chu to fight the world." Zhao Sheng slowly straightened his back and said with a chuckle, "The cavalry of Great Zhao is ready to go." Over the years, with the resources of the East Sea, Great Zhao has flourished, and now has trillions of people and over 100 million mighty soldiers, all of whom are heavily armed and elite cavalry. Chapter 979. Wu Qi was still crafting items in Great Horns's lair, while Princess Zhang Lu and Yi Xia were working hard to train the new army. The 6 dynasties had taken away 6 out of 7 of the East Sea's military forces, and now the East Sea's military force was a little stretched, not even enough to maintain a regular garrison. Fortunately, the Ling dynasty had pulled back its forces and dared not to go all out against the East Sea. Princess Zhang Lu had only maintained a regular garrison on the border, while the rest of the cities and military towns were basically planted with fake banners and flags. New soldiers were still being trained in the underground spirit cave, and the shortage of military forces in the East Sea would soon be solved. But on the border of Diyu, the 6 dynasties had set off a frenzy. Whether it was Diyu, the Ling dynasty, or the Shizhou dynasty, they were all suffering because of them. With enough troops and top-notch experts, the 6 dynasties had returned to their original appearance as war monsters. Yan Dan stood on the top of a mountain. In front of him was an important military town set up by the Shizhou dynasty to guard against Diyu's attack. The town measured about 100 miles in both width and length, and its walls were densely covered with sharp alloy spikes. Any ordinary human soldier who touched them would have their limbs cut off immediately. 2 million people were stationed in the town, and all of them were soldiers. Apart from a few women who provided the soldiers with their physical needs, there was not a single civilian in the huge town. Across from the town was Liang Province, a 9th-grade province in the northwestern frontier of Diyu. With a population of less than 10 million, Liang Province was suffocated by this military town. From time to time, civilian women were abducted by the Shizhou dynasty soldiers in the town. The prefecture overseer of Liang had repeatedly asked Diyu for reinforcements, but Diyu, who was busy pacifying the southern region, did not have any extra troops to send here. But recently, Gao had stationed 200,000 soldiers of the Flying Bear Army here, completely suppressing the arrogance of this military town. The Shizo dynasty soldiers no longer dared to go out at will, for fear of running into the scouts of the Flying Bear Army. After all the soldiers of the Flying Bear Army were at least in the Panga Heaven realm, and over 90% of the soldiers in this military town were at the first Panga Heaven realm. Therefore, they did not have the courage to fight against the Flying Bear Army. Only with the help of the freakishly solid city wall and the powerful defense mechanism of the military town managed to resist the attacks of the Flying Bear Army. Looking at the military town ahead, Yen Dan smiled and nodded to Han Fei, who was standing beside him. Han Fei, it's up to you now. Han Fei smiled warmly. He pulled out a 3-feet-long writing brush, which was as thick as a baby's arm, and drew a line in the air while growling in a low voice, "Words are the law. Activate." As Han Fei's voice rang out, the freakishly tall city wall of the town suddenly collapsed. A bottomless crack, hundreds of miles long and a mile wide, appeared on the ground, splitting the town into 2 halves from the middle. Hundreds of black-clad oracles of Great Yen stood halfway up the mountain, raising both hands at the same time. Large clouds of dark clouds shot out from their palms, turning into a dense dark cloud that spread toward the military town. Han Fei's earth-shattering attack just now had shaken the millions of soldiers in the city, and even the few Shizo dynasty supreme oracles could not react in time. The dark cloud enveloped the military town, and a strange aroma with a fishy smell slowly spread out. Everyone, including the few supreme oracles, swayed and fell to the ground, unconscious. The dark cloud was made with a secret recipe of the East Sea, using the pollen of the horned snake Rotten, collected from Yuan Ling's nether realm as the main ingredient. Its effect was 10 times stronger than the drunken dragon incense recorded in the Scroll of Stealing. After all, Yuan Ling's skill in concocting pills was much better than that white mouse's. The soldiers in the city were defeated without a fight, and the army of Great Yen charged in and captured all the soldiers. In just 1 month, Great Yen had conquered 36 cities and 127 military towns of the Shizo dynasty, shocking the imperial court of the Shizo dynasty. While Great Yen was attacking the cities, Wei Wuji was personally leading 300,000 soldiers of Great Yen to attack the capital of a human kingdom. The garrison was also 300,000 soldiers, and Wei Wuji had also sent out 300,000 soldiers to attack the city. Logically speaking, Wei Wuji was sending his soldiers to their deaths. But they were worthy of being the soldiers of Great Wei who had dominated the Warring States period. Naked from the waist up and wearing only a pair of trousers, the soldiers launched a tidal wave of attacks at the garrison on the city wall. They did not know pain, did not know how to dodge, and did not know fear. Under Wei Wuji's personal supervision, they only knew how to climb the ladders desperately to the top of the city. The guards on top of the city wall were terrified as they fought against these Wei Wuzu who were like mad tigers. They were killed one by one, and their heads were hung on the belts of the Wei Wuzu as trophies of war. Blood flowed down from the bodies of the crazy Wei Wuzu, dyeing them red. In just an hour, the morale of the garrison collapsed, and the soldiers threw down their weapons and fled in all directions. 300,000 Wei soldiers roared as they charged into the city, killing all the defending soldiers. The emperor of the kingdom knelt before Wei Wuji in horror and begged to surrender, but he was beheaded by Wei Wuji with a sword. Laughing wildly, Wei Wuji gave the emperor's most beautiful concubine to the soldier of Great Yen who was the first to rush into the city, then sat on the high throne with the emperor's beautiful queen in his arms. On the southeast side of the city that was attacked by the Great Wei, a fierce battle broke out. On the grassland that stretched for tens of thousands of miles, the 100,000 great Zhao infantrymen under Zhao Xing's command were surrounded by an enemy army that was 10 times their size. The grassland was empty, and there was no place for them to defend. The sky was filled with arrows, and the soldiers under Zhao Xing's command were riddled with holes. Riding on his mount, the enemy's general laughed wildly. He waved his sword and ordered the soldiers to attack with all their might. He wanted to kill all the 100,000 soldiers of Zhao Xing. He wanted to cut off Zhao Xing's head, make his skull into a fine wine vessel, and offer it to his emperor. The battle lasted for 6 hours. Besieged by superior forces, Zhao Sheng's army was almost crushed several times. Just when the soldiers around Zhao Sheng were about to lose the enemy's attack, a total of 10 teams of cavalry came roaring in from all directions. Each team had only 10,000 soldiers, but they were all riding huge and ferocious demon beasts, plunging into the enemy's formation like 10 steel blades. With just one thrust, the army of 1,000,000 soldiers was cut into dozens of fragmented formations that could not be connected at all. White-haired and white-bearded Lien Pe, clad in a heavy armor, laughed wildly as he wielded his long blade and spurred his mount forward like a flaming cloud. From a distance of over 10,000 feet, he unleashed a beam of blade energy, slicing the commander into two right in the middle. Thousands of soldiers were killed by this single attack, both in front and behind him. Li Mu, who was leading another group of cavalrymen, snorted angrily and glared at Lien Pe, venting all his anger on someone else. Sword beams rained down like rain as he swung his sword again and again, sending heads flying into the sky wherever he passed. In a flash, he had killed more than 10,000 soldiers, and the enemy soldiers were so frightened that they bowed to him and lost their will to fight. Zhao Sheng raised his sword and laughed wildly. His laughter frightened the millions of soldiers, who knelt to the ground and begged for their lives. On the other side of the battlefield, the ground in front of Baiqi was littered with corpses as more than 1,000,000 soldiers were slaughtered. Su Fu, whose face was purple with excitement, danced and recited a spell, calling Lei Meng's real name silently. An enormous electric current fell from the sky, and Lei Meng was satisfied with the death of 1,000,000 soldiers. Then, a huge beam of red light fell, and 50% of it fell into Baiqi's body. Shrouded in a bloody mist, Baiqi suddenly raised his sword. The soldiers of Daqin, who were also shrouded in a bloody light, threw their heads back and roared like wild beasts, their killing intent shaking the surroundings. Meanwhile, in the capital city of another kingdom not far from this bloody battlefield, an emperor was howling in pain. His entire body was ablaze with ghastly ghostly fire, and he was struggling and twitching on the ground in pain, looking at the few most authoritative ministers in his court in confusion. Li Si walked out from behind the curtain next to the throne with a sinister smile on his face. He cupped his fist at the ministers and said, "Congratulations, everyone. You and I are now ministers of the same dynasty, and I hope you will take care of me in the future. His Majesty will reward you handsomely for abandoning the dark side and joining Daqin." Without shedding a drop of blood, Li Si had overthrown the kingdom in one fell swoop. Only the emperor had died unjustly, not knowing why his ministers had poisoned him. Far away from the kingdom Li Si had overthrown, two kingdoms were engaged in their final battle. Both sides had mobilized the last of their armies, from the generals of the Second Panga Heaven to the ordinary soldiers of the First Panga Heaven, to the lowly slave soldiers and slave soldiers, and even the ordinary strong men were sent to the battlefield. More than 1,000,000 regular armies had been gathered on both sides, and the number of cannon fodder soldiers was uncountable. The war, which had lasted for more than a year, had exhausted both sides. They were looking for the flaws of the other side, preparing to launch the final and most deadly blow to the enemy. However, a deafening rumble was heard as a few great rivers in the vicinity rolled up huge waves. Countless huge beasts were seen galloping on top of the waves. Tian Dan and Tian Ji led countless soldiers of Qi state and charged towards them. The soldiers of both states were completely annihilated. Traveling eastward along the Great River, the great army of the Ling dynasty, which was sweeping westward in the northern region, was running wildly in the mountains and forests. Everywhere was shrouded in mist, ghostly shadows could be seen, and the melodious singing of mountain ghosts could be heard. The gentle voice often attracted the soldiers of the Ling dynasty into the mountains and forests, and they never showed up again. From time to time, hailstones would fall from the sky, smashing the soldiers' heads and making them bleed. Occasionally, a thunderbolt would fall from the clear sky and burn many soldiers to a crisp. Swamps would emerge out of nowhere from the plains, quicksand, seas of fire, and countless traps of poisonous insects. The army of the Ling dynasty, which had a scale of 1,000,000 soldiers, was like a big apple, being peeled layer by layer, becoming smaller and smaller. And the man who did this was Chu Ping's son, the crown prince of Great Chu, Chu Ying. He had summoned countless mountain ghosts and Yin deities to construct the formation of Pantheon. The army of 1,000,000 soldiers of the Ling dynasty, together with the several tens of thousands of oracles who followed them, were trapped and killed by the formation. None of them could walk out of the forest of death. Outside the forest, Chu Ping had summoned a giant ghost that stood 1,000 miles tall. With a gentle palm strike, he lifted the wall of a great city of the Ling dynasty, then brought the mighty army of Xiang Yu and rushed into the city. A towering blood-red light towered into the sky. The movement of the 6 dynasties shocked the world. Wherever the army of the 6 dynasties pointed, the Ling dynasty and the Shizhou dynasty were all helpless, and all the kingdoms in the outer heavenly realms trembled with fear. In just 3 years, the territory of the 6 dynasties had expanded tremendously, and when their territories were joined together, they had nearly occupied the entire northern region of Diyu. Chapter 980. In the center of Kamhart City was a cluster of ancient wooden buildings. This was the most prosperous business and entertainment circle in the city. Although the dynasty was founded with the will of Buddha, the Shizhou dynasty did not abandon the normal business activities. The people of the Shizhou dynasty only had fewer distracting thoughts than others, and they had all kinds of emotions and desires. In this cluster of wooden buildings, there were at least over 100 brothels of extremely high quality, and all the people who came and went here were rich and powerful. Without enough wealth, no one dared to take a step into this place. In a private room on the 3rd floor of a restaurant named White Lotus Puri, Jing Ku was sitting at a table with a golden blade. While drinking, he grabbed large chunks of beef that looked like snowflakes and shoved them into his mouth. In just one meal, he had drunk 30 jars of fine wine and eaten 15 kilograms of beef. While laughing and drinking, he kept yelling about how happy he was. Some people on the street recognized this man. They put their palms together and bowed to him, saying, "Merciful Buddha! Greetings, Your Majesty!" Qin Huang gave a hideous laugh as he slowly stroked the wine cup in his palm. Soon, half a cup of fine wine melted into wisps of white smoke and dissipated in the air. The wheel was blasted to pieces by the thunderbolts, and the thunderbolts struck Emperor Wugo's body. Ouch! Emperor Wugo howled miserably as he was knocked flying hundreds of feet away with black smoke rising from his body. More than half of his body was burned by the thunderbolts, and he barely managed to stay alive by relying on his prime Zen power. Compared to the incomparably luxurious and extravagant capital city of the Ling dynasty, Kamhart City truly lived up to its name. The city was surrounded by a city wall that measured 1,000 miles in both width and length. Clear water bodies could be found everywhere in the city, and small streams and rivers could be found everywhere. Springs and ponds could be found everywhere, and there were also quite a number of deep lakes and ponds. Next to the streams was a pure Bodhi tree, its green leaves edged with a faint golden hue. As the breeze blew past, the whole city was filled with golden-green waves. Emperor Wugo nodded and said with a smile, "If you have something to discuss with me, Recluse Zhang should go to the imperial palace." Sovereign Wugo nodded slightly, then said with a smile, "As Benefactor Zhang said, please." Very gracefully, Sovereign Wugo extended his right hand and made a gesture of invitation. Jing Ku snorted coldly, then said in an indifferent tone, "I'll go talk to this bald donkey. Wu Yang, you stay behind and provide support. If something goes wrong, just use the life-saving spirit talisman crafted by Wu Qi himself and smash him to death." Zhang Yi smiled. He shook his head and said, "I have come this time to discuss the future of Daqin and the Shizhou dynasty with Your Majesty." Zhang Yi squinted his eyes and smiled like a fox. "It's very simple. The Shizhou dynasty will provide the money and goods, and I, the Daqin kingdom, will dispatch the army to attack the Ling dynasty. This is the best of both worlds. Of course, Daqin kingdom has lost too many soldiers, so the compensation will be slightly more expensive." Gently, Jing Ku placed the wine jar on the table, opened his mouth and sprayed out a stream of white mist. All the tipsiness in his body was expelled. He rose to his feet steadily, turned his body sideways and stood next to the open window, looking into the distance. Zhang Yi thought for a moment, then bowed to Emperor Wugo and said, "Please forgive me, Your Majesty, and allow me to demonstrate to you what I, the Daqin Kingdom, can do." Qin Huang sat on a seat next to the window, hiding half of his face behind the window out of habit as he quietly watched the passers-by outside. In his hand was a wine cup the size of a child's fist, half filled with fine wine. From time to time, he raised the cup and sniffed the aroma of the wine, but he did not touch a drop. Zhang Yi sighed, shook his head helplessly and said, "Please forgive me, Your Majesty. I dare not go." Emperor Wugo thought for a moment, then nodded and said, "Please tell me, Benefactor Zhang. Why have you come to see me?" Jing Ku's fingers twitched as he cursed in a low voice. "Why is that old bastard Zhang Yi here? When it comes to fighting, I can beat 3 of him. When it comes to playing with words, 30 of you and me together are not as good as 1 of him. We are in big trouble now." Zhang Yi clapped his hands and said, "Indeed, Your Majesty is wise." Jing Ku smiled coldly. Qin Huang chuckled and said in a low voice, "What a pretentious bald donkey. Ha, he prays and salutes everyone he sees. He is so pretentious all day long. How could he have the time to deal with the affairs of the Shizo dynasty?" Even the current emperor of the Shizo dynasty, Emperor Wugo, dressed like a monk, often wearing a linen kasaya as he wandered around calming Heart City. No man or woman, old or young, needed to kneel and salute when they saw him. Everyone and Emperor Wugo would put their palms together and chant the name of Buddha as a form of etiquette. Emperor Wugo exhaled a mouthful of dark smoke, his body shivering as he asked, "May I ask Your Majesty Daqin, what is your opinion on the future of the Shizo dynasty and Daqin?" The middle-aged woman was beaming with joy, bowing and thanking him repeatedly. The little boy bowed and saluted Emperor Wugo as well. Emperor Wugo laughed, then handed the string of pale purple Buddhist beads in his hand, which was obviously not an ordinary item, to the little boy. "It is fate that brought us together to meet. This item will accompany me through 3 reincarnations. Keep it well. When you are able to comprehend something from it, come and find me in the palace." A young man, who stood 9 feet tall and had a jade-like face, was walking towards Emperor Wugo with a smile on his face. He was wearing a yellowish linen kasaya, with a string of pale purple Buddhist beads on his left hand. He was walking towards Emperor Wugo while stepping on a lotus flower in a pond. The lotus flowers in the pond were not densely packed. Every 3 to 5 feet, there would be a blooming flower. However, with every step he took, he just happened to step on the pistils of the flowers, and as light as a feather, he came to the busiest business circle of calming Heart City. Zhang Yi gave a graceful smile, nodded his head and said, "Your Majesty, please don't laugh at me. I, Zhang Yi, am just a common man in the mortal world, always running around like a fly for personal gain. I am not worthy of Your Majesty's praise." He paused for a brief moment, then said in a deep voice, "The reason why the Emperor of Daqin, Yingjing, has sent me to calming Heart City is that I have something to discuss with Your Majesty." Qin Huang nodded his head excitedly. With a crooked finger, a small and exquisite dagger appeared in his hand. The young man smiled and bowed back to the man. A middle-aged woman walked past, pulling a little boy with her. The woman put her palms together and bowed, while the little boy looked at her and laughed. Emperor Wugo smiled and nodded his head, then gently pressed his palm on the boy's head and said, "You are happy to see the Buddha. This young man has a great affinity with the Buddha, and his future is limitless. Congratulations, my lady benefactor, your family is blessed." Jing Kun narrowed his eyes and said in a low voice, "If it were not for the fact that our purpose of coming here is not to kill him, I would actually try to kill him. Even if he is the reincarnation of the Buddha, I still have many ways to destroy his soul and scatter his soul." Some even addressed the man as Reverend Wugo. Apparently, they did not regard him as the monarch of a dynasty, but respected him as an eminent monk. Emperor Wugo put his palms together and bowed to Zhang Yi smilingly, then said, "Since you are here, you are my guest." Could it be that you are the Daqin who has conquered over 800 cities and towns of the Ling dynasty in the past 2 years? Zhang Yi stroked his beard and said with a smile, "The Daqin mentioned by your majesty is exactly where I came from." Without hesitation, Zhang Yi took out a spirit talisman personally drawn by Wu Qi, crafted using the leaf of an innate divine tree found in Yuan Ling's nether realm. With a shake of his hand, he sent a stream of energy into the talisman, activating the Three Corpses explosive thunder talisman, which was drawn by Wu Qi with his natal energy. After giving a few words of advice to the little boy, Emperor Wugo flicked his sleeve and walked slowly towards White Lotus Purang. A peddler selling tea on the side of the road offered him a bowl of green tea. Emperor Wugo hurriedly took the cup and drained it in one gulp. After that, he solemnly bowed to the peddler and expressed his gratitude, then began to recite a long prayer scripture for him. Emperor Wugo smiled faintly. A ring of Buddhist light shone from behind his head, illuminating the entire Calm Heart city. Chanting rose from all directions, and a fragrant mist rose in spirals, intoxicating everyone. Hundreds of Buddha figures emerged from the Calm Heart Pagoda, while a vast power of Buddhist Zen swept across the sky. Zhang Yi's body stiffened slightly, and he was nearly knocked away by the surging power of Zen. A loud boom rang out in the sky. Countless fireballs, measuring about 1 mile in circumference, rained down from the sky like broken charcoals, shattering the defensive mechanisms around Calm Heart City. 3 thumb-sized thunderbolts of purple, red, and blue intertwined with each other as they plunged down from the sky, smashing straight onto Emperor Wugo's forehead. A Vajra wheel of Buddhist League, with 3 layers inside and outside, had already shot out from between Emperor Wugo's brows, emitting beams of Buddhist light to protect his body. However, as the talisman drawn by Wu Qi with his cultivation base of Tao-breaking realm, its power was simply a cheat. Zhang Yi smiled, a very proud smile on his face. Emperor Wugo narrowed his eyes and looked at Zhang Yi. He nodded and said with a smile, "What Benefactor Zhang said is filled with Zen. Benefactor, you and Buddhist League are fated to meet." However, before Jing Ku could go downstairs to talk to Emperor Wugo, a handsome man clad in a long black robe and a tall hat made of black jade had already walked out from a brothel across the street. He bowed to Emperor Wugo in a very carefree and unhurried manner and said, "Zhang, emissary of Daqin, greets your majesty." Just as Jing Ku's eyes were burning red from the alcohol, Qin Weiyang finally cried out in a low voice, "He's here." Emperor Wugo immediately burst into laughter. He beckoned at Zhang Yi, then sat down on the grass by the roadside and said, "Benefactor Zhang, you're telling the truth. Considering your background and purpose of coming here, could it be that you're afraid of being surrounded and killed after entering the imperial palace of the Shizo dynasty?" The kingdom of the Shizo dynasty, Calm Heart City. Emperor Wugo gave Zhang Yi a glance with a smile, then shook his head and said, "Benefactor Zhang, what talent does Daqin have? How could he possibly affect the future of the Shizo dynasty?" Zhang Yi clasped his hands behind his back and laughed proudly. However, Emperor Wugo rose to his feet, trembling as he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Stop! Don't act recklessly. This is an honored guest of our dynasty. Quickly open the guest in and ask Benefactor Zhang to have a good rest." Even the imperial palace of the Shizo dynasty was like this. It was a small imperial palace that occupied an area of less than 1,000 acres. Rather than calling it an imperial palace, it would be better to call it a grand temple. Inside the temple was the tallest building in the entire Calm Heart City, a Buddhist pagoda that stood 18 stories tall. This Buddhist pagoda was carved from a single piece of fine jade, and its surface was inlaid with countless precious pearls, relics, and other Buddhist treasures, as well as several tens of thousands of images of Buddhas. The name of this Buddhist pagoda was Calm Heart Pagoda. It was a Buddhist magical artifact with incredible power, and it was also the core of the defensive mechanism of Calm Heart City. A large sheet of auspicious light surged from all directions as countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, clad in armors and holding weapons in their hands, angrily surrounded the pagoda. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.